Role-playing games first began in 1971. Don't ask me why I know that, because I'm the one who did it. Thank you very much. All my dates are backed up by court documents. Thank you.
The king has died. There's chaos in the kingdom. The half-men have overrun Blackmoor, and you have to straighten it all out. The king's daughter needs help. Okay, you come out.
This is the Blackmoor Bunch, the group of wargamers who were instrumental in the creation of role-playing games and ultimately Dungeons & Dragons. They are about to embark on an epic adventure, and tonight is a special occasion. They are seated around Dave Arneson's ping-pong table. It is covered in brown paper maps, just as it was the very first time they gathered to play in 1971.
This is a Shame Plays podcast extra. Content that was not recorded as part of the live Shame Plays radio show. Enjoy.
Shall we play a game?
Why, yes. I believe we shall.
Oh, I got a live one here.
Hey, Shame Plays here. The audio clips that you heard at the very beginning of the podcast were sampled from the rough cut of the Secrets of Blackmoor, the true history of D&D documentary. It's a 2-hour documentary that's currently on Kickstarter through basically midnight Christmas Eve, December 24th. So the documentary started with the question, who was the first player to die in a role-playing game? And Griffith, he says, call him Griff, and his partner, Chris, they call themselves the Fellowship of the Thing. They went on this 5-year investigation, 10 cities, over 200 hours of footage, more than 20,000 documents and photographs. So they have all that together. So a couple of things I want to mention. One, Griff several times off the record and also while we were talking and recording stressed that this is not Dave Arneson versus Gary Gygax. This is not what this is about. I guess he's encountered that a lot over the years as he talks about Dave Arneson and his Twin Cities gaming group back in the 60s and 70s and their influence and impact on D&D and role playing. But what this is it's really he just wants to tell the story of Dave Arneson, who is credited as a co-creator of Dungeons and Dragons, and a lot of what happened with Dave Arneson and his gaming group before he met Gary Gygax. And then of course Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, became friends and partners, and the rest is history. And there goes TSR, and D&D hits the pop culture landscape, like a bomb, and the rest is history. But this documentary is more about where did role playing itself come from. As the Kickstarter page says, it's the story of the invention of role playing games as told by the people who were there, the Twin Cities gamers. Now, some other things I want to mention is that there's, as I was editing this podcast, I don't know, I've never had this issue before, but there were several times where it was recorded in stereo, where one channel or the other would suddenly increase in volume. So I had to do some editing there, so you'll notice several times throughout the podcast that it's still listenable, you can understand what's going on, but there's odd little audio artifacts, I guess, if you will, and so I didn't want you to think there was anything wrong with your headphones or computer or phone or whatever you're listening to this on. Also, we cover a lot of ground before we ever actually go into the nuts and bolts and specifics of the Kickstarter itself and pledge levels and what you get and all that. That happens about 2 hours in. So if that's all you're interested in, which is fine, jump forward till about the 2 hour mark or thereabouts. It was 2 hours before I started recording these intro notes. So, but anyway, it's thereabouts around 2 hours towards the end, the last 20 or 30 minutes or so of the podcast. And then there's a lot of discussion of Dave Arneson's role. And one of the things I think that's really important with this, there has been some documentation and discussion of Dave Arneson and his gaming group in the Twin Cities, in relation to D&D history, but I'm not sure that there's a documentary or a historical source that goes this deep. Like I said, we've got 200 hours of footage that they're editing down to a 2-hour documentary, and they've got like 20,000 documents and photographs. And if you follow the Kickstarter campaign updates, there's some really fascinating historical documents. This isn't just opinions and theory. This is all well documented. And the gaming group that involved, like David Wesley and others. Some people say David Wesley actually invented role playing, but anyway, there's a lot of really important figures that were in this gaming group. So Dave Arneson and this gaming group are getting a very, very sincere love letter, documentation, whatever, making sure that their contributions to this important history is known. So anyway, here we go with Griff and the Secrets of Blackmoor, the true history of D&D. So folks, this is Shane Stacks of Shane Plays. Every now and then I will do what's called a podcast extra. And that means that it is content that was not recorded as part of the Shane Plays Geek Talk live radio show, but the person or the project or both or whatever was important enough and time sensitive enough that I wanted to do a podcast. And so I've been lucky enough to work out something with my guest, who I will let introduce himself in a moment. But we're going to be talking about the Secrets of Blackmoor documentary, which is currently on Kickstarter through Christmas Day, December 25th. And I feel that this is important enough that I wanted to do a podcast on this and help get the word out before the Kickstarter ended. So as most people know, if you're a longtime listener of the show, I'm not only a big tabletop RPG gamer, but I'm big into the history of tabletop RPGs. And this project, Secrets of Blackmoor, I think is very important for a couple of reasons. One, they are focusing on a lot of, well, not a lot, but almost primarily Dave Arneson and his gaming group's incredibly vital contribution to Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop fantasy role-playing and role-playing in general. And then also they have uncovered and found, documents and really good, practically archaeological documents and artifacts from even before, if people were role-playing, but they weren't even calling it that yet. So it kind of shows what was to come. And so I wanted to talk about that, but I'm going to shut up about that now and let my guest introduce himself. So all the way, we're I know you're on Pacific time, or not Pacific, you're on Mountain time.
No, we're in Mountain time.
We're in
Denver.
You're in Denver. Okay. Go to Colorado.
Yeah,
all right. So go ahead.
I'm Griff.
Yeah, this is Griff. This is Griff, who is part of the Secrets of Blackmoor documentary team. And go ahead and introduce yourself, Griff, and tell us a little bit about yourself and your involvement with this documentary.
I don't know. There's not a lot to say. I'm Griff. I'm a gamer. Been a gamer for a really long time. Probably started gaming. It's hard to tell. When do you go from chess to something else? But
Right.
My first experience with games was Panzer Blitz back in, I think, 1975, 76 or something like that. And I don't know, kind of a super nerd, shy kid all my life. And I'm trying to think of what else to tell you. I just always loved D&D and gaming in general, But, oh, yeah, what I was going to show you was this is where it gets bad. If I flip my camera around.
Yeah, we're on Skype, so I can see his video, but this is
you
an
can't,
audio.
but your fans.
Yeah, this will be an audio podcast. But yeah, you're actually playing Empire on a Play-Doh emulator, correct?
Yeah, this was, I wanted to it's, hello. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
There we go. I have to look around my camera here.
Nice. Yeah, so you're actually going to be playing a hardcore old school game multiplayer. I think you said it was the first multiplayer computer game ever.
Yeah.
Was that correct? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but what I wanted to show you, that's why I was saying, beforehand, I knew you were in a hurry and you couldn't do video. But I was all excited about
Showing off
showing you some of the stuff
Empire.
Play-Doh.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'd love
Well,
to,
not just Empire, but
Yeah.
check this out.
Yeah.
I just typed in
Yeah,
D&D.
D&D, the classic. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, so this was, let me go back.
Yeah.
This was the classic D&D computer game,
Yep.
and I'll just go into Weisenhut Dungeon. I think I'm in Weisenhut Dungeon and play.
Yeah.
Oh, let's see. I'll get a character. I'm going to hurry up and do these. Yeah, just take these values.
Yeah, this is
My name is-
seriously old school. Yeah. Yeah, I'll kind of narrate. He's rolling up a character in the lowercase D&D game on the Play-Doh system or on the old school mainframe, where you had several D&D inspired computer games in colleges, universities in the 70s. Griff is actually, I'm watching him play right now, the lowercase D&D. There was also another game called D&D, but I think the D was capitalized, but they were actually two separate computer games. It's interesting to see you playing this because I've been working with Matt Barton on the second edition of his Dungeons and Desktops, the history of computer role-playing games book. And, we spent quite a bit of time on the Play-Doh era and the mainframe era of computer role-playing games. So,
it might have been, I started with Play-Doh. I wanted to talk about this because, for my personal experience with gaming, you're looking at this really primitive D&D game, right? But that was my first experience with D&D, was getting on the Play-Doh mainframe in around 1976 and finding this weird game called D&D, and I didn't even know it stood for Dungeons and Dragons. We just called it D&D.
That is fascinating. Yeah, that is super cool.
And then about a year later, my family moved away. I lost all my contact with the system, and I stumbled into a game store, and they had this other game called Dungeons and Dragons, and I was like, oh, wow. Somebody took the computer game and
made a tabletop game out of it. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I started reading it, and I was like, nah, the other one existed first, And it's sort of like everybody has these preconceptions like that, right? Like even with the movie, I talk to a lot of people, and they're like, oh, Gary Gygax did D&D, blah, 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 blah. Dave Arneson did it. People get in all these fights, and it's like, well, your preconceptions are pretty much locked in with your first experiences, and it's really hard to break out of that.
It's very hard. Yeah, once you establish your headcanon, it's very, very hard. I still do it today. I find myself tripping up on my own preconceptions, and I've had the preconceptions so long, they feel like valid, genuine memory to me, So, no, I know for a fact that, what's that? Yeah, attack that monster.
Yeah, and we're going to fight the monster.
All right.
I just got killed.
You got killed.
My first.
That's okay.
Anyway,
that's D&D. That's old school D&D, baby. There was, where I'm actually my D&D group that I DM weekly at local game store. We've been playing 5th edition for a couple of years, and we really enjoy it. But I like playing old school stuff too, a lot. So in between campaigns, we're playing the Keep on the Borderlands in the B/X basic, not the Beck me, but the B/X, which was, is it Moldvay, I think. It was Holmes, Moldvay, and then Mincer. Yeah, so we're playing the Moldvay. And they're learning. You really don't get attached to a character till probably about 3rd level because they die quick. Yeah. So, but I wish I wanted them to get a sense of the history of the game. And, I thought I was like, hey, I got their buy-in on it. I was like, do you want to do Keep on the Borderlands in between 5th edition campaigns? And they were all up for it. So I did it. But what I really wanted them to see is that in today's gaming, it's very open-ended, and you can make whatever kind of character you want, and it's fun. Don't get me wrong, it's very fun. I still enjoy playing 5th edition D&D a lot. In fact, I think it's a great edition. But there's a sense of accomplishment in the early editions of role-playing games that the new role-playing games don't recreate, right? I mean, your first level D&D player now is like a third or fourth level in old school D&D. You know, it's very hard to die. You're pretty powerful right out the gate. And so one of the things that I wanted to do with playing an old school game, not only just for the fun of it in the sense of history of like, hey, here's what it used to be like to play, you know, basic D&D, but I wanted them to show, you know, yeah, it was harder, but that sense of accomplishment that you got by surviving to a later level was, you don't get that these days, in my opinion. I mean, it's still fun to go up levels and everything, but it, you know, it's not guaranteed. Today, it's like you could still have character death, but it's pretty much a given that you're going to make it a few levels, right? Whereas in old school D&D, I mean, you could literally get one-shotted in your very first encounter and you're done, you know, and your character that you
learn to run.
Yeah, you learn to run. Yeah, you learn to run. You learn to be strategic. You learn to run. You know,
I think it's a difference. I think that the big influence is the difference. You can even trace it in movies. Okay. Like you look at a lot of the epic superhero movies and stuff, you know, they run into a bad guy, take off their gloves, and there's a big punch up. It lasts a long time. And if you look at like the stuff that for instance, Arneson was basing his ideas on, he was really drawing on Gothic horror, where you go into a place and you don't understand it. Right. And you're this tiny person and you feel really small because there are things out there that want to eat you. Yeah. You know? So I don't know. I think maybe that might be part of it. It's just a social difference between, you know, now and then. Right.
Well, and, you know, people are enjoying D&D and role-playing games. And I don't want to get too far down this rabbit hole because this is a very long conversation in of its own right. I want to make sure to talk about your documentary.
Not a lot of time, so don't worry about it.
Yeah. So you know, the people are enjoying tabletop role-playing games now. It's huge. You know, we're in a renaissance. But they're enjoying it in a different way, I think, than it was back in the day, you know, and neither, you know, really it's subjective. Some, you know, it's not one is necessarily better than the other. You know, I started playing D&D in like the 80s, so I have a preference for a certain style.
Right.
You know, but that doesn't mean that, you know, mine is quote unquote better. But with this group, you know, I wanted to show them, hey, here's what it used to be like. 2, wow, you really get a sense of accomplishment when you make like 3rd, 4th, 5th level or whatever. It's like, you're like, wow, I really did something here. And then also to stress the dynamic of teamwork. Like I have a role in this group, right? And like I do this and you do that and you do that. And then we work together as a machine. Whereas in current D&D, you really don't have to do that because you could be like a wizard that is your lock picker, right? That I took that skill and I'm going to pick the lock. So it's much more fluid and less defined in more modern D&D that, you know, everybody had a role. So anyway, enough of that.
Well, you know, I'm a big proponent for the older systems, you know, and I think that it's funny because people think that because I'm doing a movie about Dave Arneson, right? I'm going to be the guy that's like gonna stomp all over Gary Gygax and say bad things about Gy-gax, right? Mm-hmm. But you know, you look at the original Dungeons and Dragons didn't have skills, and it's not because they didn't know about skills. Arneson had skills in Blackmoor very early on, you know, and so Gygax got kind of enamored of the class system. Mm-hmm. Original D&D doesn't even have thieves, right? And so. Yeah,
you had like what? You had fighting men and wizards, basically, right? And clerics, I think, were the 3. I can't remember. Yeah.
Cleric, wizard, and fighting man. Yeah. And a lot of people don't realize that actually is a really profound design concept to have it that open. Because like what you were talking about, you know, when people get into their characters and stuff, if you're not adding a lot of skills and things and building things on your character sheet like that, what you're doing with your character is you're giving it a name and you're giving it, you know, when people ask who you are, you're like, oh, well, I'm, you know, Snarf from the land of whatever. And, you know, I come from a long line of warriors. But you would invest, you know, like one of my longest lasting character, and it's embarrassing. He only made it to like 4th and 5th level, like 4th level or 5th level fighter, 4th level wizard. it was an elf character.
Sure.
To me, that's like massive. I made it to 4th level. Okay.
Right.
But I invested so much in that. I still remember his name was Berlini the Great, and so whereas in these new games, I think people are spending too much time looking at the charts and not looking at the persona they're creating.
Yeah.
That's a different style. I don't know if that's what you were talking about.
I think so. And some of it is, it's almost like exhibition spectator, and I'm not, I actually do not mean this as a derogatory term, because there's millions of people playing D&D and other role-playing games right now in a renaissance, and they're enjoying it, and they're helping the hobby thrive, and I'm all about it. But I call it hipster D&D, right? And it's like the hip, cool thing to do right now. And you got Critical Role and Matthew Mercer and the beautiful, funny people from Hollywood are playing D&D, and now everybody wants to play D&D. Yeah. And I'm actually not down on it because it's helping the hobby as a whole, but it's not my style of D&D, right? I'm not like, I want to get together with my friends once a week, every week, and I want to play D&D. I'm not worried about, is everybody going to take something clever I say and make a meme out of it, right? That's just not,
right.
That's not my approach to D&D. But there's a lot of people that are, this happens a lot. The past couple of years, I'll go to cons or at, the game I run or at the game store. There are a lot of people going, hey, I saw this thing called Critical Role and I want to play D&D. And so it's good for the hobby. Right. I'm really not down on it. It's just, people are like, do you watch Critical Role? And I'm like, not really. It's not my style of D&D, but if you dig it, more power to you. So, but anyway, yeah, you're actually playing Empire now on the Play-Doh system. So when you had told, we were talking a few days back, and you said, hey, I'm going to play Empire. And I went, oh, I've played Empire. And you're like, well, I don't think you've played the one I played. This is actually a multiplayer space game on the Play-Doh system, right? Where I played.
I know the spiel because I've been pushing Empire for years, trying to get new players. It's basically the oldest multiplayer arena game, but it's sort of like a cross between like a combat game and Risk, because the only way to win is to move armies from planet to planet and kill your enemies' armies. So you're running around shooting each other, trying to keep each other from moving armies and trying to move your own armies. And it looks really boring, but it when you learn how to play it, it's about as fast in your head as playing a game of like, name the latest Twitch game you play.
Right.
Yeah,
and I'm personally not a big Twitchy gamer, but not because I dislike them, just because I'm not that good at them. But anyway, yeah. So, and there's another game called Empire that I first got off of a bulletin board system in the early '90s and played on my Amiga. That's what I thought you were talking about. But this is way back in the day. Yeah. I had an Amiga, and I've got, actually, I don't know if you can see in the screen behind me, I'm pointing, there's an Amiga 2000 right there that I'm pointing at.
I had the 500. That was cool.
Well, I had the 500, but a buddy of mine, Nathaniel Tolbert, who I actually know through Matt Barton, some other, we have a little Facebook group that we talk and hang out on and talk about games, but he gave me that because I happened to be going through his neck of the woods, and he's like, here, and he gave me an A500 and he gave me an A2000, and he's just really, really nice. So, and then that definitely tickled my nostalgia bone. And I'm trying to build a retro, because I've got the Amiga 500, the Amiga 2000. I've got an Apple IIe. I've got Intellivision, Atari 2600, not the Lynx system, whatever the Atari, TurboGrafx.
So you could have like a shelf with all of those, and you could put like maybe a can opener on one end.
On one end.
To show the evolution.
Yeah, show the evolution of technology. But I'm sure they played games with can openers. Yeah, an electric can opener, which we had one when I was a kid. I'll never forget that sound. That if I hear an electric can opener, that will definitely take me back to my childhood. But anyway, yeah.
It'll be like a cat. Like when the cat hears the can opening somewhere,
he'll
come running in.
Pop it up. Yeah, exactly.
But you'll have like an image of SpaghettiOs in your head or something.
Right, yeah, right. But anyway, yeah, so I, just trying to collect all this old technology, and eventually, I have this, I'll have my man cave or whatever you want to call it with all this old retro tech. Or I'd love to have like a local museum that would want to, display this stuff. But anyway, so, getting back to Blackmoor, I definitely supported the minute I saw your Kickstarter. I supported it because I think it's important. One, I love all of the interest in role-playing game and D&D history right now, and people are acknowledging its huge significant impact on pop culture and entertainment. I love that. Yeah. So when I see a project like yours come along, it immediately catches my attention. But, as I mentioned earlier, a thing that really grabbed my attention was that you were focusing on Dave Arneson's contribution. Now I'll tell you, and then we can kind of go into it from here, but, or I'll let you, kind of tell me what your viewpoint is if you want. I think in the past few years, there has been more of an effort to make sure that people understand Dave Arneson's contribution, right? Which was huge, right? To call it huge is almost an understatement. I mean, Dave Arneson was vital. Now, and Gary Gygax played his part too. I think it's both and, not either or. In all honesty, as far as getting D&D to the masses, right? Right. It's a both and story. But
you need a team. I mean, on any project, you need a team. Like even with the movie, people think I'm going to do this thing by myself, and it's like, I stumbled into doing the project, and
oh yeah. Well, tell us a little bit. What is your role, and who are the other? I think I brought that up earlier and then forgot to follow up on it. But as far as the documentary that you're doing, Secrets of Blackmoor, what is your role, and who are the other main, culprits, partners in crime that you have doing this with you?
It's basically just Chris Graves and myself, and we worked on other projects together. We were doing like an internet company, like a startup thing for a couple of years. We've done other movies together. And somehow I stumbled into doing all this D&D research completely by accident. I started playing, and he told me, oh, my our buddy, one of the guys that we worked on this company with, he was playing with Chris's brother, actually. So they invited me, and I got into their Pathfinder group. And so I went from, I'm kind of old. I hadn't played in 20 years. So I was going from about AD&D level, first edition AD&D level to Pathfinder. And they threw the book at me. I rolled up a character, and it happened to be a wizard, which is about the most complicated thing you can probably do in a new game. And they started playing, and I just sat, and it took me 2 hours to come up with my character while they played. And that's how I got back into it, and that's kind of what led me to just start to poke around the web, Mm-hmm. And then, I've talked about it before. I hate to just go in all the details of who did what, this did that. But we're kind of a team as far as Chris has got a lot of experience with production. Mm-hmm. There's a film on the web. If you look for American History, movie by Trey Parker. Yep. And Trey Parker did that when he was in college. Well, that was actually done by Trey Parker and Chris Graves. They did it for a history class as their final assignment.
Yeah, I see it here.
And together they won a student Academy Award with that project. So yeah, Chris and I we kind of hit it off as far as, we have this weird history where it turns out we know the same people for the past 25 years, but we just always circled opposite, like we were in opposite orbits around the same people, Right. And I even met him once in a coffee shop. I walked in, and he was having a meeting for this magazine that he was running, and I was introduced to him by the guy I knew that was working with him, and I was with my daughter, who was about two at that point. And so I was like, well, I don't want to interrupt your meeting. I'm going to go over here with my kid and have my latte. And that was that. And then we didn't meet again for another 20 years. But then I was like, oh, yeah, you're the guy I met 20 years ago in that coffee shop, and you did that magazine. And he was like, yeah, that was me,
Yeah.
But anyway, that's another digression. The thing is I just stumbled into doing all this research, got into arguments with people on the internet, and I didn't really think that I didn't know about gamer culture because I'd been out of it for so long. So I was sort of shocked to see that people were still arguing over the whole Dave and Gary thing when it's like, my first set was the white box set, and you look at the cover and it says Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson.
And Dave Arneson, right. And just for the people who are listening, if you're listening to this and you're new to RPGs, or you've only know the last couple of editions, first of all, bravo to you. I think that researching the history of this stuff is fascinating. But what Griff's talking about with the white box, I believe, is in 1974. Basically TSR, which was a newly incorporated. I think Gary borrowed some money from the Blooms or something, and they sold.
Well, that's like confusing because Gary's his best friend in high school was Don Kay.
Don Kay, and, that's it. Well, he borrowed money from Don Kay, and then Don Kay died, if I remember right, and that was like a big blow.
He died around 76, I think.
Yeah.
So he didn't disappear right away. He was around.
Right.
He didn't really. D&D is just riddled with the wreckage of tragedy. Like, people want to argue about this person did that, this person did that, and this person is better, and this person is worse.
Right.
But if you look at D&D, it's sort of like the magic ring in the Lord of the Rings. It's like, be careful what you wish for. Here's this magic ring. Yeah. Now the worst thing in the world is going to happen to you. You've got this evil bastard after you.
Right.
And D&D is the same thing. You touch it, and it's like a test, it's sort of like I don't know if you've ever seen Tarkovsky's, not Solaris, but the other one, Stalker, where they're searching for the secret room, and it's this place that'll give you whatever you wish for. And really what it is a test, it's like if you're too greedy, you're going to get exactly what you want,
Yeah.
And so back to D&D, I don't think Don Kay was greedy and did anything, but here's this guy that, really helped leverage D&D into being what it is. Nobody knows who he is. And he died of a heart attack like a year, 2 years after it starts.
Yeah, a lot of the biographers, and there's some good biographers out there, and there's some bad biographers out there, and et cetera, but they all sort of tend to agree that was a big blow to Gary Gygax and whatnot when he died, because he was a personal friend. And he was the one that I think, for some reason I said the Blooms, but they came later. TSR probably would not have happened without Kay.
Yeah.
So, and then he died, and that was kind of a major blow to Gary Gygax and some others. But some people almost say that was kind of a turning point in TSR and D&D at period, even back in the early days. So, but anyway, so okay. So you got you and you've got Chris, and you guys how did you end up making this documentary? Like, how did it go from, I'm kind of playing around, and now we're actually making a documentary?
Okay. I'll tell you the story. Here goes the story. I'm on the internet. I'm on a Facebook page, and it happens to be Gary Gygax's birthday. And, I'm not all wrapped up in all the gamer stuff. So I go like, so I typed in during this discussion, but what about Dave Arneson?
Okay. Because everyone's talking about
my God. Okay. Oh, my God. So, the stuff that people were typing back at me, I can't repeat on your podcast, but it was like just full on.
Wow.
It was a storm.
For even bringing Dave Arneson up?
Yeah, there's this amazing hostility for Arneson. You even bring up his name, And it's funny because it's not like you're saying like, yeah, but Dave Arneson is 10 times better than Gygax. It's like, no. They did it to somebody like me who opened that white box and everything said Gygax and David Arneson. They did it together. Anyway, so I was just like, whoa, well, this is interesting. So I just started sort of poking the beehive just out of curiosity, and I would make little comments and goad them a little bit because when I don't know, when you see people get that kind of reaction to something, you wonder why. You know?
Like what's going on? It's like a cult of personality or something. Yeah.
Right. And then suddenly I start getting these messages from some guy, and I don't know who this guy is. And he keeps telling me like, no, you're right. and he's sending me all these links. So I'm like, well, this is hilarious. I've become somebody's proxy in an online firestorm.
Right.
And so I'm taking all these links and I'm posting them, and all I'm doing is saying like, yeah, but what about this article? And then I just step back for a day and watch it.
And watch the hijinks ensue.
And then, yeah, I mean, it just pouring gasoline on this fire and just stepping back. And then, I mean, it was just hilarious. I mean, it was hilarious. But then I started to get kind of creeped out. Like, who's this weirdo that's sending me links?
Right. Yeah. Who's feeding me this stuff? Right.
Right.
Was he signing it? Was he signing it a period friend?
Yeah. I think it was like Mr. X or something.
Mr. X,
that,
right? Yeah, Comrade X.
Yeah, Comrade Orcus.
Yeah. I love it.
So anyway, finally I was just like, this is weird. This is getting really weird, And so I said, like, who the heck are you? And he's like, oh, I used to be Dave Arneson's webmaster.
Wow. Well, that'll, you're like, okay, so that got your attention even more, I imagine.
Yeah. So I started talking to him, and he told me about how, well, he was like, well, if you want to know more about this, you got to meet these other guys. So he introduces me to, suddenly it goes from me to talking to this guy up in Minnesota to me talking to a guy in Germany and a guy in Norway. So I start talking to Havard and Raphael, who were at the time both working on Blackmoor Forum.
Okay, so what year is what kind of time frame is all this happening?
Oh God, like almost 5.5 years ago.
Okay, so
5 years
2012-ish, 11-ish, 12-ish, somewhere around in there, maybe. Okay, maybe even later. If we're talking 5 years, 18, it's about 2013, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the two names you mentioned that were on the Blackmoor forums, now who are they?
Havard is really the one running the forum now, and it's the oldest Blackmoor and Dave Arneson fan site. It's like, if you want to know about Dave Arneson and everything that he did, you go to the Blackmoor forum, and people who played in Arneson's campaign post there.
Okay.
I mean, not to say that there aren't other places like the OD&D 74. It is probably the biggest history forum.
Right.
But you get these enclaves where people don't have to fight over things. I think that I talked to like Bob Meyer, who was he's known as Robert the Bald. He's like he was the first person to reach 20th level in Blackmoor. And he said that when he first got on the internet, he got onto Dragon's Foot, and and people started chewing on him the way they chewed on me. But he was like, wait a minute, like Dave Arneson was my roommate in college, and I was in his campaign, and you're telling me all this stuff, and it's like, it wasn't like that, So somehow Kevin got onto this thing. I don't think he could have known I was a filmmaker, because I'm pretty private about what I do. I really don't like having, like, I don't even want people to know what I look like, really, to be honest. I'm kind of giving you a favor by giving you crappy video of me.
You look like exactly what I would want my cool gaming buddy to look at. You look like a mad scientist.
Yeah, but you can't smell me.
Well, you look like a mad scientist who's cool, but who probably won't blow me up. But there's just that little hint of enough of danger to make it that more exciting. But
I'm a good party member, and I'm a really brutal DM.
You're a brutal DM. All right.
Yeah. Like, if you want me as the guy that's like playing the thief or the fighter, I got your back. But if I'm your DM, I really like 20% is really what I aim for as my death rate per session.
I dig it. That I think I've exceeded that with my BX game, but without meaning to. But anyway,
it's snatched in there.
Well, at one point they were like, I'm like, they haven't had an encounter in a while, and I'll just have a random encounter of 6 skeletons, and those skeletons wrecked them. I was like, what the? Because they wrecked them. Well, they had 2 clerics. Both clerics failed their turn check, and then the skeletons were not only hitting but rolling high on damage. And I mean, just racking and stacking them. And I was like, oops, so it could have been a TPK just out. But anyway.
No, I did the same thing. I mean, I had a 4 kobold attack. Yeah. They were on a little, like a balcony over the room, right, with bows. And so I figure, like, well, this will be interesting because they've got to figure out how to get up on the balcony. And
Right.
They'll be taking shots, whatever. But these guys are wearing AC2. They're not going to get hit a lot. Somehow I'm suddenly rolling. I'm just rolling up the 20s, right?
That's exactly what happened with me with these stupid skeletons.
Run across the room, and I take out like 2 fighters and a cleric out of a party of, I think I was running, they had 8 that time. I always make people run 2 characters so I can kill one and they get another one, you know. And
I do the same thing with these older games.
Mayhem, more carnage, it's more fun. Anyway, yeah, it was the exact same thing. It was just like I didn't even plan. I thought it was just going to be like this will be the first stage as they enter the Kobold Warrens. It was the end of the game section, you know. And so they retreated the 2 rooms out of the dungeon. They weren't even in it yet.
Right.
And we had enough time that we could do the whole like go back to town, rest up, come back. So they decided to build like a ramp, and they came back with the ramp and it's like a big door panel that they slapped up against the balcony and ran up to get the kobold. Anyway, that's
but I love it because I do feel that there was more problem solving in older D&D. Like we got to figure out how to get past. You know what I mean? There was a lot more of that kind of. We got to build a ramp. You know.
Have you ever heard the story about Dave Arneson's first dungeon adventure?
No, I have not. Please regale us.
Oh. Well, I've heard it several times because we made Greg Svensson tell it to us a couple times because he was the only one who survived that adventure. But essentially what happens is they go in, they don't know what they're doing. They've played Brownstein. They sort of have an idea. Like, it's the house style already to do kind of a role-playing game, so they're not unfamiliar with it.
Right, and Brownstein, people will hear that term. There was a series of adventures around a city called Brownstein, right? What's that?
Yeah, we'll go into we'll go into that after this, maybe.
Yeah,
because that's a whole. You know, we open that can of.
That's a whole. Brownstein is not a gaming system; it was a gaming setting. But a lot of times they say we did. You'll hear people say we played Brownstein, or they'll say it was a Brownstein style game.
You know, it's hard because you know, this is digressing back into more movie stuff. But one of the big problems with making the movie was coming up with definitions for things.
Right.
You know, and everybody's like everybody's like, we can sort of agree like what a role-playing game is, but if you ask somebody to like, you know, tell me what a role-playing game is and try to like capture that, you know, in a couple sentences, and it's like, well, it's got to have this and it's got to have that, it's got to have hit points, individual play. Nobody really knows. There's no definition for it, right?
Right.
Except for it's this sort of make-believe theater of the mind sort of thing. And so anyway, the Brownstein, so with the movie, what we really did was, instead of saying this is a role-playing game and this is not a role-playing game, when looking at any game, all we did was say, does it have something that's role-playing like in it? And if it does, we're just going to call it a role-playing game.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe this is a level 1 role-playing game and this is a level 2 role-playing game. We're not even going to define it like that. We're just going to say, well, they've started to add this element into the game, and they're doing this thing. So with the Brownstein, that's really the first time you get individual characters. You know, like I am a person going into a situation, and I have my own personal objectives, and I don't know what anybody else's personal objectives are.
And that sounds almost like a casual comment now, but in late 60s, early 70s,
it's Christmas of 68. You know, this is the 50th anniversary of Brownstein this Christmas.
Right, which is why you're releasing the full documentary on Christmas Day, which is pretty cool. Quick note here, it's actually not the full doc that will release on Christmas Day, but I think a rough cut. So anyway, just want to clarify that, and we discuss it later in the podcast. Which is, if people go to Kickstarter, look for Secrets of Blackmoor, and people can get more information about that. And there's a roughly 35 minute sort of pre-cut to kind of give you an idea of what the documentary will, which is it's in a rough state, but it's good. But anyway, yeah. So Brown's,
4 months away from having a finished movie.
Okay, but you're going to release a fuller draft cut on Christmas Day, right?
Yeah, well, you know, one of the things we talked about, we need all this color work, and basically we need just some finish work. So if you it's hard to explain to people who don't do movies that you lay down, like a documentary, you're laying down all the interviews, people talking, and you're laying down the voice, the narrator, And that's really the that's what takes you years and years to do, is to
Right.
figure out what the story is and assemble it. And we're assembling out of like 200 hours of footage, this 2-hour documentary. So it's like really digging through. And so we have this draft. All it really needs is just to stick things on there so when somebody's talking, like a document floats across the screen or something.
Right.
All the animation work, which is a lot of grunt work that's kind of like waiting to be done right now.
But it adds so much, it's that final 10% of polish adds 50%, to a movie or a documentary or whatever, or a video game or whatever. But so the point I was kind of narrowing in on was, it almost sounds like a casual throwaway comment now, but to say that, oh yeah, in Brownstein style gaming, you played an individual character that maybe didn't realize the other people's motives and that sort of thing. That's like a nuclear bomb going off. I mean, that was...
It is and it isn't, though. For those guys, it was normal.
Yeah.
They had already gone through the stages of doing campaigns where they were like the generals, and like they would do, like, say it was the Civil War, right?
Right.
You get your buddies together and say, okay, half of you are the Confederacy, half of you are the Union. You're going to be the actual generals. You're General Pope, and you're gonna run this area, and then somebody's going to be president. He's going to give you guys orders and tell you where to go. But then when the armies run into each other and we have a battle, everybody gets together, and whoever's there, we split them up, and you play the generals on the field controlling specific units, and we fight a battle.
Right.
So they were already doing this. So, like, I think for them it was a very natural progression.
Well, yeah,
I don't think it.
Right. And even
shocking.
The rough cut that you can see now, like the 35-minute Secrets of Blackmoor rough cut.
GaryCon.
Yeah, the GaryCon. It was screened at GaryCon. It's on YouTube. Search for Secrets of Blackmoor. And from there you can see that it is a natural progression for them. There was this group of gamers. They were all buddies. They got hooked up with Dave Arneson, who at that time was a 16-year-old kid, because they posted, I guess in Avalon Hill's newsletter or whatever, said, hey, I'm looking for people to play games with. And suddenly, you got all these people hooking up with Dave Arneson, and they're spending, 12 hours down in the basement, once a week, playing war games. If a lot of people like Griff and I know, but a lot of people don't realize D&D and fantasy role-playing and role-playing, tabletop role-playing in general, came direct lineage to tabletop war games. Direct lineage. Yeah, direct lineage. Wouldn't have it without it. So, in fact, it could be argued, and this is oversimplifying things, but it could be argued that D&D is basically just chainmail battle, wargaming, fantasy wargaming with role playing added on top of it. So, and I know that's oversimplifying it, but it's the
chainmail connection is kind of a weird one.
Yeah,
it's like, because chainmail is the first fantasy game that, like, a first fantasy, like first miniatures rule set that comes out with fantasy rules. Okay.
Right. Well, I know that,
but it doesn't have role playing in it. There's no role playing in chainmail. Right.
Where the lineage of, as I understand it, of chainmail going into D&D is, in chainmail you were playing an individual person rather than. No, was it like? Well, no, I thought that you didn't have like five. Like if in chainmail, if you put a figure down on the table, that didn't represent like 5 troops, right? Didn't it represent just like one?
Depending on what scale you were using.
Okay.
It's interesting because those game systems are very, like, if you weren't familiar, like being a gamer back in that day, and the way I don't know if you've really read chainmail closely, it's incredibly confusing, okay? So you have a medieval combat system where, like, one figure represents 20 men, okay?
Okay.
Then you've got this fantasy combat system where you have one figure represents 1 man, and then somehow you're going to merge this medieval system with this 1-to-1 system, and they did, because they understood these ideas about units, and then they had these ideas about like some ideas that sort of relate to hit points appear in chainmail too, where it's like you have to have a certain amount of hits before you get killed. But those also those are older concepts that come into chainmail. But I think that it's difficult to talk about chainmail without really defining what it is and what its purpose was. I think that now I'm starting to sound like a college professor, but I think it's really important to define one's terms in these in this.
Well, you have
and define,
to. I mean, that's fair enough, because we're trying to research the history of something. So I think it's okay to sound like a professor.
Yeah. So you get into sounding like a history professor. And then there's a lot of like sort of retroactive history writing. Like there's a thing in chainmail about sapper tunnels. Okay, it's not even a whole paragraph. I think it's 2 sentences, right? And now people are saying like this description of how to make a sapper tunnel is where the idea of a dungeon came from. And it's like, I don't think so, because a sapper tunnel was a straight line you dug somewhere, and then you put stuff in there, set it on fire, and collapse the tunnel, and hopefully collapse the castle above it. You know, it doesn't have doors, it doesn't have rooms, it doesn't have treasure chests, none of that is in there. And so I don't know. I anytime somebody brings up the chainmail connection as the source for role playing, I just debunk it, because I think that there is a much clearer source, which is the 1880s Tauten's Strategos, which is what all those players, we know they played it, you know.
All right, so that was really good stuff on chainmail. One thing I wanted to kind of, I guess, clarify from my end, I do think some people think that like chainmail suddenly just spontaneously became D&D, and I've been disabused of that notion years ago. The more I research, like anything, D&D and role-playing game history and the people involved, it's much more nuanced than you assume going in. But I do, you had the tabletop wargaming rules, fantasy wargaming rules that were chainmail. And then I know that like some of that was adapted into D&D because it was already there. So I don't think that like Gary Gygax or anybody suddenly went, hey, let's make a role-playing game out of chainmail, so, but it was, it was kind of I know that like some of like the fireball spell and like the fighting man and some other stuff, I think can be traced back to chainmail, but I don't think it just spontaneously became,
it's funny that you're talking about that, because that's sort of an interesting thing too, is if you look at Arneson's work in Blackmoor, there isn't a lot left of it. We suspect we know where it is, but that person is just not letting go of it.
Okay.
Unfortunately, Arneson gave it to a friend of his, and his friend has been hiding it, and he claims he's trying to do something right for Arneson. He won't let anybody see it.
Well, I do want to say, now that you've said that, you and Chris and all the people involved, y'all have a metric butt ton of documents that you've uncovered, though. You may not have that, but y'all have stuff that nobody else has ever seen.
There's a couple places that are. Ooh, I was going somewhere with what I was going to tell you, and I lost it. Darn it. Anyway.
Well, while you're looking for it.
Oh no, it was about the development in chainmail. Yeah. One thing you have to understand is that the thing that back in the day when people were doing these things, they were almost like computer programmers that use object-oriented languages,
right?
Or like people call them, we call them plugins now, or apps,
right?
Like you get your browser, but then you want the special whatever thing on to add that on.
Modular,
so that's
almost.
That's the way they treated mechanics in that time period, So when Arneson wanted to do his Blackmoor game, my buddy Gary's got this chainmail game. I'll just use that. So he took the combat chart,
right?
And
it should be noted that before TSR came along, this was just a bunch of buddies and acquaintances playing games and borrowing from each other. Hey, you made what's the game? Fire from the Skies, that was based on the Blue Max. Fight in the Sky. I'm going to run Fight in the Skies with one different rule. And everybody was cool with it, because they weren't doing it for profit at that time. Everybody was just trying to have fun.
And it was like going over your buddy's house to play poker. It's like, we're going to, Larry has a collection of Napoleonic miniatures or Napoleonic era sailing ships, let's say. And he's got, his own, he's been using these rules, but he doesn't like the way that the canons work, so he's changed the rules. But he doesn't write it down. He just kind of like remembers it, and he's going to be the referee. So we're just going to play by his rules because he's like the dealer, And so that's how it went. But back to the Blackmoor thing, Arneson pulled that in, but then there are all these other mechanics that nobody really looked at, And one of the first ones I was fascinated by, as sort of an indicator of role playing, was door opening. It's like the tiniest. It's in original D&D. It's just like a sentence. It says door. In order to open the door, you have to roll a 1 6-sided die, and you do it on a 1 or a 2. It wasn't even modified by your strength or anything. It's just everybody gets a 30% chance.
And I think that's survived all the way into at least Moldvay. It's pretty basic for a few editions, no pun intended. So yeah.
Well, and that's what's interesting is that there's nothing in chainmail about opening a door. There are no doors in chainmail. Maybe castle doors. I don't know, but then you look at David Mcgarry's Dungeon board game. What do you do to find a secret door and to open it when you pass?
You roll
a 6-sided,
right?
On a 1 or 2. Okay, and so not too long ago, Dan Boggs, because part of the whole process of doing this movie is I wanted to make sure that I wasn't coming up with a bunch of garbage and off in outer space by myself. So I reached out to some researchers that were looking at a lot of Arneson stuff, and Dan Boggs and Era Winner, and there was a guy named Michael Wittig we were working with for a while too. Dan started tracing this set of rules, and he finally found somebody up in Duluth, Minnesota, whose husband or whatever had been somehow associated with Arneson's group. He was actually more associated with Barker's group, Empire of the Petal Throne. But this guy had this copy of these old rules that we've traced back to Richard Snyder. And we call the Snyder variant, or I call it the Snyder variation because I used to play chess, and I think everything should be a variation.
Right.
But in the Snyder variation, there's a little sentence about what to do to open doors. It says to use a chart, and we think that it's referring to the chainmail chart, and to treat opening a door like an attack on a wizard, or something.
Okay.
So like different classes would even have a different number they roll based on what they are,
which makes more sense. But
it's a 2-die roll.
Right.
That's not what ended up in D&D. What ended up in D&D is exactly what you see in Dungeon, which Dungeon existed before D&D.
Right.
It was a complete game.
And I would say in most people's assumption, they would assume that Dungeon came after because there's so many elements that are D&D like in Dungeon. I would have assumed that, Milton Bradley or whoever wanted to put out some basic tabletop, board game based on D&D. But yet here's another example of, no, that was actually around before D&D was published. So
and it's kind of ironic because, there's and without getting too stuffy about the college professor thing, but a traditional wargaming is just an extension of chess. You can move this far, you have this much strength when attacking, and then you have the Kriegspiels broke into this free Kriegspiel, which is much looser, and what Totten with Strategos, the American Kriegspiel guy, wrote in 1880. You start to get a freer game where in the middle of the game, this is a good example of role playing in a war game. You come up to a river and you can't cross it because the water's high. So you look around and you're like, well, are there any buildings around? And the referee says, well, there's that farm building over there. So you go, well, can my men run over there and grab that barn and just take it apart and we're going to build a bridge out of it? And the referee doesn't say, no, you can't do that. The referee says, well, hang on. I got to figure out how long it'll take you to do that. But you can do it. And so that's how they started, was with these weird little touches of you can use anything in the environment to affect the environment, and so they go from these strict war games all the way up to these weird war games, all the way through Brownstein, where all this, no, you're not interacting with the environment, you're interacting with other people, but it's still a role-playing game. It's just a different kind of role-playing game, all the way to Blackmoor, which is what D&D uses as its play style. And then David Mcgarry sees Arneson's Blackmoor, and he says, God, this could be a fun board game if you just got rid of the referee.
Yeah.
And so he takes
He came
so
up
he
with
takes
rules that didn't need to referee.
right. He's taking this abstract concept that is like sort of the pinnacle of design, of design theory for all these games, and then he reduces it back down to something that's more like chess, without any role playing. So they actually do a full circle loop in the Twin Cities, all the way from a strict board game up to freeform fantasy, back down to a strict war game.
Which is pretty
And both
neat.
those, and they both get published by TSR.
Yeah. And
By Gary. Gary was right there with.
There are people. I mean, what's interesting about Dungeon is, I mean, it's still being published today. There are a lot of people, like I'll read online. There's people that have fond memories of playing Dungeon, like I have fond memories of playing like D&D in the 80s. So it's a big deal for them. But I did want to. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, no, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, if you ever get a chance to play with David Mcgarry, he'll just kind of watch you play the game. But as you pull out the cards, he will DM them for you.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, I would love to get up to the Twin Cities and meet these guys.
Yeah, like if you're the wizard and you're like, I don't know what to do. He's like, well, that thing, it's like when you cast that spell, it's like this ray of light emanates from your hand and envelops the creature, and it slowly dissolves and disappears. So it turns, even Dungeon turns into a role-playing game when you get Mcgarry there taking you through it. It's amazing.
That is super cool. Okay, so you said something earlier. We were talking, I think, off the record, if you will, or I didn't have the recording started or something, and I wanted to kind of dig into this a little bit. And then I don't want to forget to talk about Strategos either, because it's hugely important to tabletop role-playing gaming history, because of its influence on wargaming and with these Twin Cities wargamers that Dave Arneson was part of. But, we talked a little earlier in this discussion that it's not Dave Arneson versus Gary Gygax, and it's not Gary Gygax versus Dave Arneson. It can be a both and sort of situation. And you had mentioned, that some of the reaction you get is people kind of like, whoa, what do you got against Gary? And you were explaining, you say, I don't have anything against Gary at all. And you were using an automobile analogy. So I didn't know if you wanted to speak to that a little bit.
Well, I think that the people want to think, or even like Steve Jobs, or who's the other guy? IBM,
Wozniak.
PCs.
You got Bill Gates, Steve Jobs. Is that you're talking about? Yeah.
Yeah. So you need that. You need a team to do something like this. And after the fact, people like to just point at the person who's kind of like heading the team and say like, "Oh, that's the guy that did it."
Right.
But then if you talk to everybody that was there, you find out like, well, that's the guy that he came up with the way the wheels could turn on bearings so that we could make them not overheat, and fall off the car. And that guy was the guy that came up with the idea for the spark plug, and that's the guy that, and you find out that all these people contributed, and it doesn't diminish any single person's contribution. I mean, I think that, Gary Gygax's, the world creation that he did is on the level of like, I don't know, like Tolkien or somebody like that in its own right, just as Arneson's creation of Blackmoor is the same way. They're just different flavors. It's like, I like Wizards of Earthsea, you like Tolkien. You can't compare them. The Wizards of Earthsea is brilliant in its own right. And Tolkien is brilliant in its own right.
Right.
I say read them both and love them both,
Well, speaking of that, what's funny is so much Tolkien influence is in D&D, but evidently Gary Gygax was not a huge Tolkien fan, from what I understand. But original D&D is hugely influenced by Tolkien. So do you happen to know what Dave Arneson's, was he a big Tolkien lover? Do you happen to know? Or
I think that a lot of it comes through Arneson, talking to the guys. Right. There are a lot of people that want to research like what are the sources for all these things, and I think I'm no expert on Gygax, so I won't go into it. Gygax, I know he had his sources. I can't pull them up right now.
Well, he had his appendix with that famous Appendix N that he put in the Dungeon Master's Guide, I think, for first edition AD&D, where he recommended all these. In fact, there's a guy who's written an entire, I think his name's like Jeffro Johnson or something like that, and he's written an entire book just going through Appendix N. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. What were we talking about? We were really just talking about the sources. I think Arneson really drew a lot from Tolkien. For the way he presented his world, I think it's a very Tolkien-esque world. But at the same time, anybody who's played D&D, if you bring in your preconceptions from your own fantasy, like literature,
Right.
it's really hard to blend it. Like I remember when I always talk about this. First time I opened a copy of D&D, it said, wizard can only use a dagger, and I'm just like, wait a minute, Gandalf had a sword. If I'm going to be a wizard, I'm going to have a
I want
sword.
Glamdring. I want Glamdring, darn it. Well, here's the thing. A lot of that stuff came from play balance, game balance. So it's never bugged me from that standpoint, because in later levels, a magic user. What's that? Yeah, we'll see that's a huge thing. The more you research this, Gary Gygax was a big rules guy. Like he wanted to come up with these rules and evidently that kind of either bored or got on Dave Arneson's nerves a little bit. It's like, I'm just trying to have some fun here. And Gary was like, hey, let's go through all these rules. So they both brought their own personality to what the game is. But as I understand it, and you were saying earlier, it's like, look, Gary Gygax has his contribution. Dave Arneson has his, we're not trying to put two crawdads in a jar and shake the jar and make them fight. That's not what we're trying to do here. Right. But again, I do think it's good to see your documentary that's talking more about Dave Arneson's contribution. Here is my understanding of, and this is a very high level overview. Okay. But feel free to disabuse me at any moment. Okay. Of my,
I can't hit you from here.
Yeah. What's that? Oh, you can't disabuse.
I can't slap you from here. Okay.
Well, I mean, it's getting close enough that we'll have these haptic masks so you can slap people through the computer or whatever. But all right. So as I understand it, and everything I've seen so far in the Gary Con preview cut, it's 35 minutes or so of Secrets of Blackmoor rough cut, tends to lend credence and support my understanding, but I haven't seen the whole thing yet. The role-playing aspect that was added to traditional wargaming came straight up out of Dave Arneson and his gaming group in St. Paul.
Yeah. And they pulled it out of a book that was...
Yeah, Strategos. Yeah. Strategos, right?
Strategos, the 1880s.
Yeah, which there's a wonderful anecdote in the movie that I want to make sure to mention here in a second. Yeah. But so as I understand it, this Blackmoor.
If you want any clips, let me know. I'll send you some clips too.
Oh, sure, yeah. I'll see what I can insert or maybe push out a whole different thing of clips. I don't know, anything I can get out by. Before the Kickstarter ends, I'll be happy to try to do that for you. As I understand it, Dave Arneson, and there's immense respect. You can hear it in these interviews on the documentary as you're interviewing his friends in his gaming group. An immense respect for him as a referee or a DM or whatever title you want to use. But really, his Blackmoor and campaign and all of that is where it started. But it probably, I won't say probably, it definitely wouldn't have become what it became through D&D and TSR and exploding all over pop culture without Gary Gygax. Because what happened is I understand, and Michael Whitwer documents this in his biography of Gary Gygax, Empire of the Imagination. Gary was invited to play in a session of Blackmoor. And it blew him away to the point to where he went home and he couldn't sleep. Like he had never, he was a big war gamer.
I would believe that.
Yeah, he was a big he's a big war gamer. I think they may have already been doing a couple of Gen Cons by then. I could be wrong, but they were doing a lot of war gaming and this and that. But Gary played in Blackmoor either with or under Dave Arneson, was introduced to Dave Arneson, played a session of Blackmoor, and it rocked Gary Gygax's world. And what Gary did was got super excited and said, and went to Dave Arneson and said, we need to publish this. This is big. And and a lot of the rules or refinements or this or that, or the edition that came out in the white books, Gary had some input in rules wise. And then Gary was like, if we're going to do the Steve Jobs analogy, and this isn't a perfect analogy because Gary was a big game designer too, or whatever. But
see, I have a lot of trouble with where you're going with this anecdote, to be honest with you, and I've run into that with a lot of people, and I'm going to just get in there, and we're going to just dig in, right?
Jump in. That's fine. Yeah.
I think it's easy for people to make a lot of conjecture about what happened, like anecdotes, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And so they put them together and kind of come up with a really cohesive answer that's sort of like this universal, like the unifying theory about how D&D happened, and I agree that Gary was blown away. I interviewed Rob Kuntz, and what he said was that he was in bed the next morning, and a minute after Gy-gax and Mcgarry left after demoing their games in Lake Geneva, he called Rob, and Rob was at his house 15 minutes later, and Gary took out a piece of hex sheet, I think it was, and Gary said, "You know what this is?" I mean, Gary understood what it was exactly. He said, "This is a way to create story narratives. You could use this to write a book." Because Gary wanted to be a fantasy author more than anything. D doesn't exist. He can't even predict that this game is the thing that everybody's going to want to do. And so he had Rob DM him through a game. And they tried to reproduce what Arneson had done. But they couldn't do it. And Gary actually had to go to the Twin Cities, like somewhere in like January or February. He went to the Twin Cities and he played with the Blackmoor bunch. And he basically sat in so that he could learn how to be a DM by watching Arneson run Blackmoor. And so, I mean, and that's probably a lot of people are going to jump on my throat for that, but I got all the sources.
I don't think there's anything. No, that's kind of my understanding is that the role playing aspect that Gary, that Arneson is the person that brought that and the Blackmoor and all that. But Gary, through TSR and saying, look, we really need to publish this and sell this and all that. And he's a gamer in his own right. I mean, he was developing games and wargaming and all that. So he had a love of gaming. He wasn't just out to only purely make a buck. But at this point in his life, Gary Gygax is literally like a cobbler fixing shoes to try to make a living.
And Arneson is a security guard, or no, he's just a college student.
Yeah, he's like a college student. And so Gary's
in his parents' basement.
Right. And Gary, I'm not sure about Arneson at this point, but at this point in the history, which is, as you pointed out, people are trying to turn it into a mythology, which usually happens with famous people. Gary had published a couple of games at this point. They hadn't made him rich or anything like that, but he had sold a couple of games. And he was like, Dave, and what I'm saying though is like, I think that if Gary Gygax hadn't come along, and in fact, I did this thought experiment with John Peterson and Michael Whitwer, and we said, what would have happened if Gary Gygax hadn't come along to fantasy role-playing game and pop culture, fantasy role-playing games. And what we really landed on is really what it came down to is what would have happened if TSR hadn't come along. And, we kind of agreed that fantasy role-playing, as we understand it, probably would have gotten out further because people thought it was great and everything. But it's hard to know if it would have exploded across the pop culture landscape in the 80s, late 70s and 80s without TSR. And I think the case can be made that you wouldn't have had TSR without Gary Gygax, because he was wanting to come at it like, we have got to sell this, right? We've got to, like, he was going to Avalon Hill. No, you don't think so?
I would disagree with that one too.
Okay. All right,
because
fair
it's
enough.
like, look at all that Ken St. Andre needed was the concept. Once he got the concept for a role-playing game, he wrote the first comprehensive the original.
Are you talking about Tunnels and Trolls? Are you talking about Tunnels and Trolls with Ken St. Andre, or
Tunnels and Trolls? Mm-hmm. If Ken St. Andre had gone to say a game convention somewhere, and somebody had been demonstrating this homebrew game of Blackmoor or something based on Blackmoor that involved role playing, somebody like Andre, Ken St. Andre would have picked it up and been like, I get it, I'm going to run with it. Because the minute the concept became known, what happens? You got a million games coming out using the same concept.
So I want to make sure.
And that's kind of the fundamental point here that I want to make when it comes to. I'm a big Arneson proponent. I'm not saying anything bad about Gary Gygax.
Yeah.
But Arneson invented role playing. Is the role playing that Arneson invented that appears in Dungeons and Dragons.
I'm not. Yeah, I don't dispute that at all. And again, that's why I'm glad you're doing this documentary.
And the reason I think it's important to acknowledge that is because the minute people see D&D, and what they're really seeing is role playing, which is Blackmoor. The minute they see the Blackmoor play method in D&D, people go, "This is cool, but I want to make a game that does this other thing."
Right.
And you see all these other games crop up, and they have completely different combat systems, completely different this and that. Like, that's part of the whole thing with the chainmail is like, well, he used the chainmail combat chart. Well, that's great, but how come Tunnels and Trolls works and it doesn't use anything from chainmail?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you can have a different game engine, and even as they talk about in your documentary, what makes the games so unique and amazing, you actually can't codify and write down. You can't make rules out of it. You can't make rules out of the role-playing aspect. There's some discussion, and but at the same time, it's the secret sauce that makes it so cool, but you still have to have some form. What's that?
We love secret sauce.
Secret sauce. So who doesn't, right? And a sesame seed bun. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is that, like, you still, unless you're just going to sit around purely on some mental level of like, well, let's just storytell. If you're going to play a game, right, you need some sort of structure that a referee or DM or GM or whoever can refer to. And so that you have some sort of controls on the consensual hallucination. And that keeps it going. And it goes back to where you play cops and robbers as a kid. Hey, you gotta fall down. I shot you. You didn't shoot me. Yeah, you did. I shot you. You're right. There's all you got to have.
That's why you need dice.
That's why you need the great randomizer of dice. So no, I have and the reason I brought Whitwer up and Empire of the Imagination, I mean, he went out of his way in his book to point out that Gary encountered the concept of role playing purely because of Dave Arneson and Blackmoor.
I
haven't
read his book. So.
Oh yeah, I mean he devotes an entire chapter to that. You had Gary, who was already an established like game player and a game lover and a game designer, but he plays in some form or fashion Blackmoor, and it rocks his world. It rings his bell. But then he starts pursuing Dave Arneson to say, let's publish a game. And then from there, he shops it around. Like Avalon Hill is evidently baffled.
I think that the big misunderstanding there would be that Arneson didn't demonstrate his game just to demonstrate his game. He and David Mcgarry had game concepts based on dungeon games, and they went down to Lake Geneva to demonstrate their games in the hopes that maybe it might generate some interest. And so, this is where I think that there's sort of a misunderstanding. Right. Dave Arneson is coming after almost 2 years of playing Blackmoor in the Twin Cities, where he's got like 20 to 30 people playing in his game. They're saying, no, this is valuable. And he's showing it to Gary. And in fact, when we interviewed David Mcgarry said, if I was worried because I was the leader of the party and I needed to get them to understand what this experience was. And he was like, I couldn't tell if they were enjoying it or if they were really starting to understand the whole disconnect that you create when you start to play a role-playing game where I am not in this room. I am in this place that's being described. There's like water dripping down the walls and cobwebs everywhere, and I can feel a breeze coming up the passage, And Mcgarry describes, he was worried that he wouldn't be able to help Arneson convey the experience to Gy-gax, So, that's another thing to consider, too. It's like at every point, what if Gy-gax had been some dumb lunk that couldn't comprehend what was going on and would have been like, oh, it's great, but it doesn't have a board and it doesn't have pieces, so who's going to want to do it, right?
Well,
D&D wouldn't have happened.
The anecdote.
And Gy-gax sharp enough to notice that. But I think
Right.
that you also have to understand that Arneson wanted to sell his game.
Okay,
you
well,
know?
see, and
He
that's
wasn't-
good. See that I'm glad you're making this documentary because the mythology that's developing, and usually, it's like you have the elephant in the room and five blind guys think it's five different animals. So, but when you put all
That's
five
the same
guys,
analogy that Mcgarry uses when he talks about everybody that's in the movie.
Right.
Nobody was there for all of it. But
Right.
anyway, go on.
well, I'd say until you talk to all five guys and put it together and step back, you go, okay, this is really what's going on. So, and I don't think that there's any biographers that I've met personally that are intentionally trying to mislead anybody. But there are, you can't go in with preconceptions or whatever. However, to get back to my original point, I think the mythology that it's developing is Dave Arneson was just this easygoing, I want a game just to play games for the sake of loving games. And oh, by the way, hey, I want you to come play in my game so that you can experience the joy of it. And then Gary Gygax was like, dude, we're going to get rich. So,
Right.
so
But
that's,
I don't think Gary Gygax even.
Yeah.
I mean, he probably thought this is a
he
great
didn't know
idea.
what he had.
Well,
Yeah, he didn't know what he had.
I talked
Yeah.
to the guys, and they're like, they would like make mimeograph games and go to the convention and pay for like their gas bill by selling
the
like 10
games. Yeah.
copies.
Yeah. Right.
And so their idea of a successful game would be to sell maybe like 500 copies.
Right.
So when Gygax prints up the first print and they sell 500 copies in it was like a month or something
Yeah, he
like that, or
couldn't
2
keep
months.
up with. He was doing it out of his basement. It was a literal, legit basement.
It was out of
operation.
John Kay. The inventory was in Kay's basement
Yeah.
or in his garage. But anyway,
Yeah, it was.
so when he's
yeah.
doing that, it's like, I mean, those guys, nobody had ever done that before. That's Parker Brothers, Hasbro, all those big companies.
Right. Yeah,
I don't mean to be too pushy. I just get when you get me going. on
this is what I want.
and I'm on my
I don't.
second espresso.
Yeah, no, this is what I want. I want to get into it. So there's a difference between drilling down and arguing. We're not arguing. We're just drilling down to stuff like what's going on. Here.
I liked your analogy about Gygax because that was one of the things I worked with when I first started. It was like if Gary Gygax had never met Dave Arneson, would we have had Dungeons and Dragons? Well, I tend to agree actually with the other guys. It's like, no, it would have come out eventually because a lot of people were doing similar things all over the world. Everybody was close to the.
Well, have you ever heard of the steam engine theory? Have you ever heard of that? Or not?
Maybe.
It's not a theory. It's an actual, back in the days when communications took forever and a new idea took a long time to get around the world. Evidently, the steam engine was basically invented by 3 different people or cultures all at the same time.
Right.
The
same thing with Darwin. I forgot the guy's name that were in Asia, and he was studying beetles. I remember concepts, but I have trouble with names. But the reason Darwin published, and he co-published with the guy that was in Asia, was because he found out he had to publish, or this guy was going to get the jump on him.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there were a lot of people doing that. But the same. So if we just go back through the equation, it's a very direct chain of events. If you don't have Gary Gygax, then you're probably not going to get D&D. If you do not have Dave Arneson, you're not going to get D&D because Gary Gygax wouldn't have gotten it from anybody. If you do not have David Wesley with his Brownstein character-driven role-playing games, you do not have D&D. If you don't have that core group of 4 guys that found Strategos in the U of M library, you probably do not have D&D.
All
So
right, I have to jump in now because I've got to tell this anecdote from your documentary. And people who love history will love this. I mean, this documentary is just riddled. It's lousy with these kind of great anecdotes. So, I can't remember the guy's name. I'm sure that Griff remembers, but there was a guy at
Nicholson
at the University of St. Paul, at whatever university it was.
What does he look like? Is he in the movie or is he just talked about?
No, I think somebody relates this story where there's a guy who there's this book.
Nicholson.
Nicholson. So there's this book Strategos, which is rules for wargaming from like the 1800s or something, and it's like
1880s.
yeah, 1880s. It's like 300 pages, and it's this amazing book on wargaming and how to wargame. And most people say, well, H.G. Wells actually wrote the oldest book on wargaming. Well, no, there's this Strategos thing, and so this guy,
and it's based on the Russian stuff, and that's from earlier. But anyway, yeah,
yeah. So, but this guy that's part of this gaming group that all of this role playing came out of in St. Paul, Minnesota, through Dave Arneson and his friends, went and looked to see who had checked out Strategos. Like in the old days, you could pull the card out of a book and see who had checked it out. And then when it filled out, you flipped it over and and there was a little pocket on the inside of a book that you slid this card in, and you could see who checked what out. And he very cleverly, with a great strategy, no pun intended, with Strategos, found all the names that had checked it out within the past 5 years, because he's like, well, he reasoned if it's more than 5 years, they probably graduated and they're gone. But if it's been within the past 5 years, then we probably have similar interests. Remember, this is pre-internet, pre-bulletin board, pre-modem. I mean, and I guess if you're on a university, you had a modem maybe, but, and he said, oh, I found these 3 guys' names that have checked this book out within the past 5 years. And he looked them up in the phone book and called them and was like, hey, we all checked this book out. Let's get together. I mean, I love that. Right. So it's
amazing.
Yeah. So, and the documentary, just in the rough cut that I saw of like 35 minutes, has a lot of good stories in there like that.
There's so many stories in the movie that we can't tell because of time.
Right.
Like Dan Nicholson, he's the guy that actually ended up with what we call the Spanish Royals, which is the first example of a character sheet. That was something we found making the movie, was in Dan Nicholson's estate.
Right.
Was this piece of paper with character attributes on it that was for a Napoleonic king.
I saw that in your in the updates on the Kickstarter campaign.
Yeah.
It's almost like a blog in its own right, all these documents and historical things.
That's what it's turning into. It's like, if people want to know the history, you can go read our updates. If you put in $5, if you just go in at the $5 level, you can see all the hidden updates where I put the secret sauce, which is like the members lease part of it. Freemium, premium, welcome to the internet.
Right.
But, what I was going to say is like, those guys, people think like, oh, Dave Arneson invented D&D, then these people disappear, right? Well, after D&D comes out later on, Dan Nicholson puts together this company, and he's got David Wesley, author of Strategos, the adaptation, Strategos N, and older gamers will know Wesley from Source of the Nile. Ross Maker is in the company. They create this company, 4D Interactive. Okay, so it's got the 4 Daves, and then Ross is there, which they say he's really just an R, and the leg fell off, so he's another D. And they go and they start porting games for I can't remember the name of the company. It was I'm having brain damage right now. They made these little ColecoVision.
I'm looking up. Matt Barton of Matt Chat has a really good interview with David Wesley, and they go into some of his ColecoVision days, but he also talks about some of his D&D stuff. But anyway, keep going.
But these guys are like all through history of gaming. It's like they're not just there doing D&D. These guys make all kinds of things. Like they work with Coleco, and then you look at the gaming industry itself. Like, now there are a lot of companies and a lot of people doing stuff. But of the old guard, it was like a handful of people, and so like the manager for ColecoVision, right, that's managing their team, is Janelle Jacques.
Right.
She's their boss and interface with the company because they're all contractors,
And she's a
big
big
I called
name.
her and she said,
yeah. Well, she's a big name for like art and then also computer design, but she's also known a lot for, she did a lot of art, right? A lot of the earlier art.
Yeah. And all of these people are all through there, like when I got together with Liz Danforth at a local, I ran into her at a convention here, and she's like telling me about knowing all these people, and she knew Dave. Dave used to hang out with the Tunnels and Trolls people later on, and so I don't know. It's pretty exciting. It's not, the movie's about the invention of role-playing games, but these people did amazing things, when it comes to gaming, and also outside of gaming. Like after they got done Dave he moved on to teaching game design, computer game design down at Full Sail later in life. When they were doing that, all the guys that used to do ColecoVision stuff ended up over at Medtronics in Minnesota, and they were writing software for pacemakers. And
Right.
they're really proud of that. Like when you talk to them, if you want to talk gaming, their eyes light up. But you want to talk about saving people's lives by programming pacemakers, their eyes really light up.
Wow, that's neat. Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's a lot.
And-
You're surprised. It's a lot of times when you research these people, it's surprising what their dual or triple identities really are. Like what all like
Right.
David Wesley. I just pulled up his not Kickstarter, his Wikipedia page. And now this isn't like saving the world with pacemakers, but not only Dave Arneson, according to the Wikipedia page, credits David Wesley with the idea of the role-playing game in general. I'd need to dig in more and see who's doing that. But, he also he created and designed Zaxxon. Now, for somebody
Zaxxon was the big one they did. That was a huge
right.
one.
And for somebody, these are like, what is
Actually, when we were
Zaxxon?
making the movie. Oh, see, you get me going. When we were making the movie, we were documenting an archive. So it was basically like scanning and taking photos with
Right.
like an animation scan of all this stuff. And we stumbled across all the original art for Zaxxon. Like it was on
man.
pieces of paper,
Man.
and each pixel was a square.
See, I
and those
would
guys-
frame that crap and put it up on my wall, man. I'm not even joking.
Yeah. It'd be
I-
cool just to have reproduced as posters, like
Yeah.
the originals on port.
I love that stuff, and some of it's just because I'm I was born in the 70s. It's just I'm a product of that. Those are big, iconic things for me, but I guess, the point I'm making, it's like, oh, well, he's, not only was he central to the creation of role playing, but he also did Zaxxon, it just blows me away. Like Steve Jobs, right? Not only did he revolutionize home computing and desktop publishing, he was also instrumental to Pixar. He programmed, I think it was Breakout, right? That was another big game. So like these people that just do they hit on so many different, levels or whatever. But anyway, back to what you were saying. You were talking about these, the people there at the beginning.
You reminded me of a funny story because when we started doing the movie, like I'm not a documentary filmmaker, okay? I had to do all of this. Like Chris too. I mean, Chris has done more work like that than I have, probably. But a lot of this we just did from the seat of our pants. And some people that saw us working in the beginning were just like, these guys have no clue what they're doing, But we just persisted. We were like, we're just going to do it. 5 years later, we got a movie.
Funny.
That's what happens. It's an accident. It's hilarious. Like if you had told me 5 years ago, you're going to make a D&D movie and all you're going to do for 5 years is concentrate on D&D stuff, I'd been like, you're crazy. This is, but we show up in the Twin Cities for our first interview trip. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I think our first interview might've been David Wesley. And I'll be honest with you, I'm kind of quaking in my boots. I'm on D&D. I'm a gamer fanboy, right?
Right.
And I'm sitting in front of the guy people have told me is the real guy that invented role playing.
Right.
Okay. And so I go to interview him, and I start to realize, well, this is cool. What's even more cool is I just really like this guy.
Right.
I
really
so with every
enjoyed. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, with every successive interview, I'm meeting these people, and God, like if I was their age and I would have been, with them back then, like I would have been one of, like, these are my people, like these are gamers, and
right.
And so when we did Gary's interview, I think that was really, it was about 2 days in interviewing, and they were going to do a demonstration of Strategos N, and they put like 1,000 miniatures on the table. Is phenomenal,
Right.
and they're miniatures that. Half the miniatures are Wesley's collection from the 60s, and the other half was Dave Arneson's collection.
And it comes up more than once in the documentary that Dave Arneson had an amazing, like he could field the biggest army of miniatures.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we go to do David Mcgarry's interview, and we had our fixer tried to get us a spot, and the location he got, unfortunately, locked us out at a certain time. So we're doing this interview. It's one of the best interviews we got. We're having a blast. all of a sudden somebody walks in and says, well, time's up, and we're like 90 minutes in and we're having a blast, and
You're like, crud.
and
Yeah.
we kind of, and
Yeah.
so Mcgarry's just sitting there at the table, and we're packing up gear, and we're chatting, and I'm chatting with Mcgarry and kind of doing the post-interview thing. I mean, you do it. You get done with the interview.
Yeah.
Chat.
And then these great things come out in the post interview, and you're like, I was recording. But anyway, yeah.
What you should always do
Is just
is
keep it
lie
recording.
and
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
the interview's over, and then just people,
Yeah,
and that's when they tell you, like, well, I buried all the bodies
Yeah.
over there.
Yeah. No,
But
yeah,
no, so I'm sitting there. I'm sitting there, and I go, well, I'm kind of hungry. What do you think, Chris? And Chris is like, yeah, I'm kind of hungry too. And
Right.
McGarry's like, oh, are you guys going to go do something now? And he's all shy.
Like he wants to keep hanging out. Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, yeah, we were thinking of going to do something. I kind of need some scotch.
Right.
You want to go with us? And McGarry's like, you're going to go have a scotch? And he's like, yeah, I'll come with you. I mean, I'm exaggerating. But
well, the point is, these are just regular, normal dudes. I mean, by having fun and playing together, they manage to be the genesis of something amazing in pop culture. And it's more than just amazing in pop culture. It's deeper than that, but they're just regular dudes. They're not, yeah. They're, like you said,
I was just going to finish the story though. It says like, so McGarry is like, yeah. And then we named the place. It turned out it was like a couple blocks from McGarry's house. So we drive across town and meet him there.
Funny. And
we go there and we have, a scotch and a burger. And then we're like, well, let's go somewhere else. So we go to another bar, and I get a phone call, and it's David Wesley. And he's like, hi, Griff. This is David Wesley. And I'm like, hi, David. And he's like, do you guys want to know where David Mcgarry is? And I'm like, well,
he's right here. We're having a scotch
together. Yeah. And Wesley's like, you are?
I'm coming over.
Yeah. Where are you?
Yeah.
And I mean, not like we didn't like, paint the town red and get trash, but it was like, suddenly it was like, oh, okay, we can hang out and just be buddies, right?
Right.
And at first we were trying to be so much like, I'm the interviewer.
I'm the interviewer.
Only,
blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's I mean, personally, with my interviewing style, if you can even call it that, I dismiss with all the formal crap. I'm just like, let's talk. I mean, I got some stuff I want to ask about, but let's just talk. And what I try to do, and you learn more and more as you go, right? But I want to have a conversation that the other person is enjoying, and that if somebody were sitting at a table in a restaurant next to us, they'd want to eavesdrop on. That's what I try to do, right? That's what I try to do. I try not to be super formal, but there's some subjects and topics and venues that you got to be a little bit more formal. But anyway, so I hate to do this. You're
going to do it. Let me do one thing.
Well, what I was going to say was I want to spend a few more minutes talking about the documentary Kickstarter itself, because we've been going for about an hour and 40 minutes now, and we haven't really touched a lot on that. So, if you
cut out the parts when I'm picking my nose.
Yeah, when we're flicking boogers at each other and sticking on the screen. I understand. Yeah, so
my good side.
Well, yeah. So was there something? It sounded like there was something you wanted to throw out there before I kind of.
Well, I think I was talking to one of the guys, the historian, somebody who was interested in the movie, and they were like, well, when this movie comes out, you're going to be like a millionaire, right? And I was like, dude, this is an independent film. Like, you don't know what the movie business is like, And he's like, yeah, but everybody's going to want to go see it. And it's like, well, actually, hardly anybody knows about it, And I don't want to downplay. It has nothing to do with how good the movie is or anything like that. It's just like, it's the reality of like, if you don't have $1 million to tell people over and over, 9 out of 10 dentists prefer Crest.
Right.
Most people buy your toothpaste because they're just going to.
I will say your timing is impeccable, because if you're going to release a documentary or independent film about this subject, now's a great time, because I mean
it's the 50th anniversary of Brownstein.
It's 50th anniversary. Plus, there's just this massive interest in role playing.
Well, it's funny because people will just talk about that, and I'm looking at like, we've got about 5,000 people on our Facebook page, and I think we have like 50 people looking at our Twitter. So I'm pretty humble about it. So our whole thing all along has been like, well, we can't really do it without our fans,
Right.
And so I keep telling people on our Facebook page, it's like, if you want to help us out, you don't have to give us money. All you got to do is take that link and drop it on your Facebook
tell
page.
people about it.
Oh, and so all I want people to do, like, I think a lot of people are really critical of the movie because of some of the claims maybe we make. I just watch that 35-minute GaryCon draft. If you like it, cool. Maybe you'll want to, join the Kickstarter. If you don't, I don't have a problem with that. Everybody likes different kinds of movies,
Well, I'll tell you, it's if people don't like what you're saying, and personally, I didn't have any problem with anything I saw in that 35-minute draft. But as you've said over and over, and as your Kickstarter updates will show, all of this is documented. You're not pulling anything out of your butt. So if they have it, I guess people could argue over the interpretation of stuff, but at one point in a discussion, the preponderance of evidence becomes what it is. So,
right.
And it looks like you have your evidence, and again, as you've really tried to go out of your way to say, you're not after Gy-gax. You're just saying, look, there were, it's a both and, not an either or situation. And it only reinforces, like I said, how I understood things went anyway, although I didn't realize how the draft that I saw,
right.
Probably, and reading through your updates at the Secrets of Blackmoor, the True History of Dungeons and Dragons Kickstarter page, I don't think I realized how important Dave's circle of friends was. I think this is the first time that's really being highlighted in a big way.
That's one of the things, I don't want to sound like a critic of Gary again, but whenever I hear people talk about Gary Gygax, they're like, oh my God, Gary Gygax was a genius. And I had never met him, but I'm sure he was. But I've walked into a room full of Dave Arneson's friends without Dave Arneson's there, and I look around the room and I'm like, that guy's a genius. That guy's a genius.
Right.
That guy's a genius. It was like all those guys are smart. Like Wesley's got theories about cold fusion. He thinks he knows how to do it. We even videotaped a lecture he did in the Twin Cities on cold fusion. I mean, these guys are just
right.
They're brilliant guys, and they're
well,
affable.
and wargaming tends, like real wargaming, like that historical. I want to know what the weather was in France on this day and how much fog there was and what temperature the creek was.
Right.
That tends to attract those very intelligent people, deep, thinkers and analytical types and all that. But anyway, so I have to ask you, a few people, I don't know if this was a regional dialect or maybe we just pronounced something wrong, but a few people in the documentary, they say Gy-gax. Yeah, they say Gy-gax. Is that a regional dialect thing?
Funny. It's funny because after we released the GaryCon draft, or even when he showed it at GaryCon, people were like, we're saying it wrong. You got to say it this way. You got to say it that way, And it sort of goes back to that, you things formulate in your head
right.
when you're very young. And back in those days, like when I bought Dungeons and Dragons, there was nobody there to tell me how to pronounce the name.
Right.
So I pronounced it Gy-gax or Gy-gax.
That's how I've always said Gy-gax, but the people that are saying Gy-gax were there.
There's even a Gy-gax in there too.
Right, but they were there. Do you see what I'm saying? Like there were people that were like part of the circle saying Gy-gax. So I was like, I wonder if
scary. Like when you go to Gen Con, and that's the other thing that too is like, you talk to these guys. Yeah, after everything fell apart with Arneson and Gygax, things got bad, whatever. But Gen Con was still pretty small, I think, back then. And when those guys met, the first few Gen Cons were like, pardon me, 300 people, okay? So it wasn't like going to a place that's the size of a soccer stadium or a football stadium.
It was intimate.
Place, and you knew everybody. And every year you went, you would see most of the same guy. You'd have a friend that you saw there.
Was it called Agricultural Hall? What was the, it was a small venue for the first few years. So, it was like we have there's a gaming con here. This guy, Carl Heil does. I've helped him promote it the last couple of years. It's Arkansas RPG Con. any tabletop RPG goes, but it has a focus on old school gaming. And you get a couple of hundred people, and it's great. You know, you get your con friends that you only see there, right? And you're like, yeah, it's more intimate, and you build friendships and relationships out of that. And everybody that's there is they're there because they love it, you know, and it's not because of whatever else. So I imagine that's, yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you see your buddy, and it's not necessarily, you know, like he might be the guy that you always play against,
right?
But he's just so much fun to play with.
Yeah,
you don't even care if you lose, you know, like yeah. Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about.
I would have loved to have gone back in time and just cruised into one of those early Gen Cons. Not that it would have been this amazing, life-changing experience, but you get to see the reality of it's just guys having fun and gals or whoever, and just doing something they love, you know, on a deep level. Yeah. But so I want to share one more anecdote from the rough cut, and then let's talk a little bit about the specifics of the Kickstarter. I loved the guy, and I can't remember his name. I'm sure you'll remember it.
It's Bob Meyer.
Yeah, he was like, he's talking, and he's like, you know what? He goes, I thought I was the rookie, and all of this stuff had been done a long time before I showed up. But he goes, in recent years, after, you know, reading biographies and researching on the internet, he goes, I was there almost from the beginning. He goes, I was, you know, he's like all these people talk. Yeah, he's like all these people talk about like Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, and he goes, but you know, there's all these other people that were there, and they were all contributing, you know. And,
well, you remember? Have you ever heard the stories by what's his name, the guy that landed on the moon, first man on the moon?
Okay, Scott Glenn. I'm not sure. I know who you're talking about. Yeah,
I can never remember names. I just remember ideas. But he described how he got back from the moon. Like, I came back from the moon, and everybody was excited, and everybody was talking about this cool thing that they'd shared in, and everybody sat in their houses and they watched it happen on TV. It was like watching, you know, like the first Saturday Night Live show or something. And he was like, and I missed it.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah,
I was there.
That's perfect. Yeah. It was a bellwether moment, you know. But yeah, I just loved that guy. He was like, you know, he's like, I was there, and I didn't even know it. You know, I never thought of it that way, but I was pretty much there from the beginning, you know. But anyway, all right. So let's make sure to spend a few minutes talking about the specifics of the Kickstarter, because I'm going to do my best to get this out December 17th or 18th. And there'll still be roughly a week left in the Kickstarter until December 25th.
Later on, when you can, you know, I mean, it doesn't have to be like surrounding the marketing and selling the product and all that, you know.
Well, and that's fair, and I appreciate that approach, but
I'm having a good time.
Yeah, I definitely want to help get the word out, though. I think it needs more visibility that it's gotten. So even though you've met your funding goal, you know, it's going to happen.
I think next time we should do a training session in Empire for you, and I should force you to play Empire with me.
I'll do a video with that. Yeah, I'll totally do a video.
Log in, do a sign on, and we go play. Okay,
yeah, I'm down. We'll do it. So you have my official permission. I want to go on record with this. I'll even lead this in the podcast version. You have my official permission to bug me about that until I do it.
All
right. So I have a feeling I've just unleashed something that I don't realize. But anyway, okay. So yeah, tell us about like this. Like, what levels can people support? What do they get? Tell us a little bit more about what the documentary is. All that good stuff. Secrets of Blackmoor. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, the first thing is people are kind of confused about some of the levels, because we're doing a weird Kickstarter. We actually have two products. We have a movie and we have a game module.
Which the game module is super cool. I wish I could afford that, but it's super cool.
Yeah. Well, you know, here's the deal: is like we're going to release the first edition, which will be like a special edition, you know.
Right.
Or it'll just be special. If you want to have the first edition and you want to tell your buddies and have bragging rights, well, you got to come into the Kickstarter, because we found that book during the exploration of the movie, you know, and it ultimately it cost us a lot of money to find that book. It was like, you know, it was one of the things. They're the maps to the dungeon. It was one of the things we discovered making the movie. So we felt that it was actually part of the movie, but it's actually being produced kind of like under a different name, because we want to make sure that all the designers that are involved in it get a fair share of the profit from the book.
Right.
So if we sell it, we have to pay like face value on the book to that sort of division of our company.
Sure.
And so there's
and
a
what
lot
we're
of
talking about,
there.
just it's the Tonisborg dungeon, right? And
Yeah.
it was either one of the first or the first actual published.
It's the oldest existing dungeon map set.
That's what
I
it
don't
is.
know
Okay,
what
yeah.
exists out of Lake Geneva, if they're originals or later. But this is the second oldest dungeon, or it's the oldest dungeon I know of, because I don't think Arneson's original Blackmoor exists anymore. It might have been lost. And so Tonisborg is really the oldest existing dungeon after Blackmoor out of the Twin Cities. And what's interesting about it is that it comes out when they start playing with drafts of Dungeons and Dragons, because Gary and Dave were on the phone a lot. Like a lot of the, people are like, well, there's no documentation. It's like, well,
They did
Dave's
a lot
father,
by phone. Yeah, they did a lot by phone.
Dave's father worked for the phone company. I'm sure Dave got free long distance. He would just call Gary, and it didn't cost him anything.
Yeah, there was remember, and this is, I can't believe I even have to say this, but I don't know who all is going to be watching this or listening to this. There was no email. There was no internet. I mean, it was very, very limited access in those kind of days.
And wait for a call.
Yeah, or write a letter, or get in the car and drive. So I've seen other biographers mention that, like, they would do almost daily phone calls to hash out the rules of D&D and all that.
Right, and that's another. Anybody who has a copy of the original Blackmoor supplement should read Gary's introduction to the Blackmoor supplement, and you can find it online too. Maybe we'll put a link. We have a link. We could link it actually. Maybe I'll link that to our Kickstarter. That's a good idea.
Yeah, again, folks.
Tonisborg.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, Tonisborg.
Well,
go ahead.
So it has this tradition. It looks different than any of the Lake Geneva dungeons. The way it's drawn is very much like Arneson's Blackmoor dungeon, and they have a different style. And it's kind of like looking at like a Picasso or a Matisse. Like they're different, And so even the artwork, I mean, the drawing itself is like a work of art, and like from a school of thought in a way, because they look so uniquely different from dungeons from other places. And then you have the way it was stocked. They had a playing draft of D&D that had come out in the summer of '73.
Yep.
So it's 6 months before D&D comes out, and they've got some playtest copy that probably doesn't even have art in it. That's just printed on loose sheets. Mm-hmm. And the most interesting thing, I think, would be the Three Crowns. In the original Dungeons and Dragons, there's a little passage about artifacts, and this is Dan Boggs. Like art, I really love to give credit to the people we worked with. Like Dan Boggs was the one who noted this and sort of discovered it. Is that there are these 3 crowns in the dungeon, and they're in the bottom level of the dungeon, and on the 10th level, and those are described very briefly just by the name in the original Dungeons and Dragons. And so you have there's this connection, these artifacts here. And I was talking to Paul Stormberg, who runs the Collector's Trove, earlier today, and he said that Rob Kuntz Gary, maybe it was Gary, either Gary or Rob Kuntz put those same artifacts in the 11th level of one of their dungeons. And so you have it's just a written passage. It's a made up thing, but it's like there's a magical thing looking at that and seeing this thing.
When you're researching the history of something you love and you wonder where it all came from, and you see connections like that, it's very exciting. I mean, I love that kind of thing, so.
And that was the thing. Well, I was just going to say, when I was talking to Paul, because I was like, my thing is all about role playing. So I kind of, once D&D is released, I don't really care what happens after that, which sounds kind of snobby and arrogant, but it's like, I'm just into the role play methodology. And I was talking to Paul, and he was like, "No, Griff, this is really exciting. You should really look this up." And I was like, "Well, we should look it up together and maybe do a blog post." But his angle was like, when you see something like that, this artifact name, and it's in a dungeon in the Twin Cities, and then it's in a dungeon in Lake Geneva, and it's in the original manuscript for Dungeons and Dragons, and there are mechanics that are written on the page for how to use this artifact, and stuff. And he was like, This is what brings these two groups together. I think people really focus on this whole battle between Dave and Gary, which I think other people took up the battle flag even more firmly than they did.
Well, the battle didn't come till later. There were several years where there was no battle. Right.
Later in life, they each other letters.
Right.
And so there's this stage where they're working together, and you can see, the fact that this exists in both places means that they're talking to each other. And there's this relationship, and there's this connectedness, and they're together. And I thought that was really interesting when Paul talked about it in terms of like the connectedness. Like, people want to talk about the disconnection, but it couldn't have happened if they weren't friends and if they weren't like closely working together, knowing each other.
Right. No, I agree with that.
And that's why I've seen letters between them, and they're affectionate. It's like, dear Dave, dear Gary. And you read the forward to, sorry, I'm interrupting you again.
No, go ahead. Yeah, it's a real conversation. Go ahead.
When Gary Gygax writes about Blackmoor in the forward to the Blackmoor supplement, he just gushes about Dave Arneson. And I think that people need to just look at that stage when it's these two geniuses that have come together, and they're going to create this thing that's going to rock the world, And
it has rocked the world. It really has. Yeah.
And so I think that maybe, bringing them together a little bit more in terms of what they created, because they did create it together in between 1972 and 74, is important. Very important.
Is. Yeah. And I think that's a great thing to highlight. One thing I want to ask, because you visited at least St. Paul. I don't know if you've been to Lake Geneva or not.
I went to Gary last year.
Okay. So you've been to both. How geographically close? Because a lot of what role-playing is, there was a lot of cross-pollination between those two gaming communities in Lake Geneva and in St. Paul. It was a couple of different gaming groups or societies or loose organizations that sort of cross-pollinated a little bit. How close geographically are they?
Whew. What is it? It's about 6 hours drive, maybe?
Is it that far apart? Okay.
I think so. 5-6 hours drive. I don't know. I drove from Denver, and it was like 16 hours or something ridiculous like that. So it's all right. That was a little bit of more like a suicide death trip to GaryCon sort of experience.
Well, I guess the point I'm kind of angling towards in my own head, trying to feel out, a lot of people, including me, unless I say, okay, dude, stop, step back, think about it. I almost think of like Gary's gaming circle and Dave's gaming circle, almost like being across a river from each other, and they were it's not like that, right? I mean, there was a lot of connections, but they were their own communities that were separated by quite a bit of distance.
They have, you can see it in the personalities. Like, they're very, there's sort of regional things that you see in people. Americans like to think of America as being kind of really homogenous, but really, like, if you drive from where you are to Chicago or to Denver, you're going to notice that people are a little different,
If you travel far enough, if you travel far enough in America, you will find the regional differences. What's interesting, this is a complete tangent. I had the opportunity to live in the United Kingdom in England for a couple of years in the early 90s. You only have to travel about 5 or 10 miles to hit those differences in England.
It's weird, isn't it?
It's weird. It's just a smaller, and to them, psychologically.
Part of my childhood in Europe, and it was the same in Italy. And it was the same
back to your point, you were talking about that. There was some differences culturally between the two groups.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
There's, I don't know. It's interesting because. The only people I talked to that were really from the Lake Geneva crowd were Rob Kuntz and Tim Kask.
Yep.
And
have you ever watched the Dwarvenaut about Stefan Pokorny? He's the guy that does Dwarven Forge. It's really amazing miniature buildings and miniatures for your
the walls and stuff.
Yeah, he's a fascinating guy. Anyway, they did a documentary on Stefan, and it's called The Dwarvenaut, and he goes to like Gen Con.
In my day, if you wanted that stuff, you had to get rocks and cut them.
Well, this is
get off my lawn,
This is exactly. Like, go stack up some pebbles, or goodness forbid, just imagine that it's there. But So anyway, every time I think of Tim Kask, there's a scene in there where Stefan is just like really hungover, right? And he's like, oh, because he was hanging out with Gygax's kids and they were drinking and evidently wrestling and underwear getting pulled off. I don't know. Yeah, it was like the party after or before Gary Con for a select few people.
Right.
I don't know. The
Probably
people
the
who are
big
really,
TSR party. They have.
yeah, the people that are really in the circle,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And have known each other anyway. And so Steph is like, oh, and he's staggering around all hungover, and Tim Kask comes up, and he's and like I you know, this is my every time Tim Kask comes up I think of this, because he comes up, he's like, I've been trying to call you like last night and today, and he like chews him out for like not and you know, that kind of grumpy, I'm a grognard and I don't care anymore kind of way.
I know that.
Yeah. And he's like, I've been trying to call you. And Steph is just like, oh, okay, man. He just keeps kind of staggering on. So that's my personal Tim Kask knowledge. So I know he was involved in the early days of TSR. So
is that at a Gary Con though?
I'm pretty sure it was. Yeah.
Hey, are you going to be at the next Gary Con?
Man, I would love to go to that stuff. It's harder for me to go to that stuff than some people might think, even though they're like, hey, man. Yeah.
It's a big, it's a big trip, and it's a lot of moolah.
All I can say is I would absolutely love to go. I want to go to Gary Con. I want to go to Gamehole Con. And I want to go to, I had a trip set up. I had it all lined up, ready to go, hotel room, ticket spot, and I was going to North Texas RPG Con, which is
I really want to go to that one too. Yeah,
it's a really good scene for old school gaming, and we had a family situation come up, knock me out of that. So I'm trying to get more to these. I want to go to the cons where, and it's almost the cliche these days to say I'm, you know, like, hey Griff, I'm glad you're doing this documentary, because we're not going to have a lot of these people that much longer. And we need to get their stories down.
It's true though.
Yeah, it's true. It's sad, but it's true. And I want to go to North Texas. I want to go to Gamehole. I want to go to Gary Con, because that's where the scene is. If you want to, you know, like, I have no desire to go to Gen Con. It's this heaving mass of pop cult. This is like, I want to go to these other cons,
is
right?
Us talking about it, or is this going to go on the show? Because I have the same feeling about Gen
No,
Con.
I will leave it. I'll leave it on the show, man, unless you want me to cut it out. I have no desire.
Fine. No, it's like,
yeah,
people want to go to Vegas. Like, last thing I would ever do is go to Vegas. Like, I would rather go to I don't know, some little outlying town near Denver and meet up with my gaming buddies and play some D&D, and then some drinks and stuff. Hang out.
Exactly. Well, they show the picture of Gen Con every year where they're like right before the doors open, and it's like a heaving, sweating mass of like.
Oh yeah.
I'm like, this is a turnoff to me. It's crazy, and there's some people that love that, and honestly, I'm not just saying this to be polite. More power to you if you dig that. But I want to go to the smaller, more intimate cons where these dudes are, and I want to get a chance to not just to play with them. I don't want to fame rub my dice on them. I just want to play with them and hang out, and and maybe document some of their stories.
Thanks to the Gy-gax's kids,
right?
That they have Gary Con,
right?
Because really, Gary Con is a small. It's not tiny. It's not like the thing that's in like somebody's church,
right?
But it's not so big that you don't know anybody or don't like. By 3 days afterwards, you've met people. You're having a fun time,
right?
And
it's
I think
small enough
that is the premier convention in America right now. People always like to brag because it's big.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
No.
I want to go where like there's a good mix of old school versus new school gaming. In fact, I'd love to go to a con. It's like, look, if the game wasn't published after or before 1990, we don't even run it here. That'd be a fun con. But I like new gaming systems too. I'm a bit of a system. I'm promiscuous. I love to learn the math.
This gamer,
I love to learn the math and the lore of new systems, right? But my heart is old school gaming, right? So, but anyway, that being said, I would love to go to Gary Con. I'd love to go to Gamehole Con, and I hope they've said, well, because I couldn't come because of a family situation, the North Texas guys were like, well, your ticket's good next year. So I hope to make it to North Texas in 2019. So, anyway, yeah. So
the only thing is I love wargaming a lot. And I wish there was a little bit more miniatures wargaming at a lot of the conventions, because the miniaturists are kind of like this dying breed.
No, I agree. In fact, who was the guy that just passed away that they called him Duke? And he was.
Freed. We interviewed.
Yeah, him. Yeah, he was big in the wargaming community.
He's not in this movie because what he talked about didn't really relate to what was going on. But
right,
we got this interview with Duke, and he's like, I don't know, he's an icon.
Like everybody loved him. And I didn't really know who he was till he was gone.
Do you collect miniatures at all?
I don't. But I'll
when
tell
I was
you.
a kid in the 70s, I remember buying miniatures, and I was buying his carvings.
Right. Oh yeah, I mean, he's also evidently like a really good ambassador for war. Like everyone loved him, right? They wanted him at the gatherings, and he was a nice guy and all this. But that's what I love about like wargaming or tabletop gaming. Like you get a kid like that dude carved my miniature, right? And the world at large is like, who's this? And like, I don't care if you know who he is or not. This is important to me, And now to backpedal, make sure I'm being clear. I do have miniatures that I buy, for gaming on a grid or whatever. But I wouldn't consider myself a miniature collector. I don't paint them, or anything like that. But I will say, and this may be an unintended consequence of your documentary, watching that rough cut made me want to go war game, right? Because you're seeing all the great miniatures and the, all the detail, and it made me want to go war game.
Yeah. Oh, I got to war game with every time I go to the Twin Cities. I get together with the guys. I make sure that I can maybe overlap 2 Wednesdays because that's their game night.
Right.
And and everybody piles in the Wesley's game room. And
that's cool,
last time I was there, I got to play a naval game.
Right.
And I didn't play in it. They were doing their memorial, Dave Arneson Memorial Blackmoor game, and I just watched and videotaped.
That is amazing. Like, so that's part of the documentary, right? You actually get to see Dave Arneson's gaming group that are his friends playing Blackmoor, right?
Yeah, that was the previous. That was like the 2016 Memorial game I think they did.
Yeah.
And they all came together at Bob Meyer's house. And Bob Meyer, that's another thing is like, you have these campaigns, and there is sort of this tradition, like it's not even about, this city's campaign or that city's campaign, but there are these old campaigns, and so you have Greyhawk and you have Blackmoor, and these are like the old campaigns, and hopefully there will be somebody to take over both of them that will be able to carry on the tradition.
So these campaigns have been going that long.
If you figure Blackmoor started in 1971.
Wow, that's crazy. And they do it. They do it now. They do a Dave Arneson Memorial game every year, right? I mean, that's But
a Memorial game, and I think that Bob will do other games. I know that Bob's going to be. Well, we're doing one of our Kickstarter gifts. I kind of lost my direction with the Kickstarter.
Yeah, we went on a tangent. Yeah.
No, with the Kickstarter, our whole thing is like we don't need everybody to throw in like $8 million. It's not about that. We just want people to see the movie. You can come in at like, I think it was $5 or $10, and you can get a digital download of the finished film.
Right.
You can come in at $5. You get to see all the hidden stuff that I've been posting. That's like the historical stuff.
And if you're into this stuff at all, people, that's worth it. Kick in $5 and just read the updates. There's some really good stuff in there.
Yeah, I thought the last update was pretty interesting. It was just a cut and paste from a computer document. But it was Dave Arneson kind of writing what he thought the history of D&D was.
Right. Which is fascinating.
And interestingly enough, it kind of parallels everything that we put in the movie. We're kind of doing his movie for him in a way.
That's so cool.
But the Kickstarter, I don't know. I mean, we're just trying to generate cash so we can just finish the post-production, which is really, it's hard to explain to people what that is, so we kind of described it as doing color and sound, but we have a lot of animation to do. The animation is the heavy lifting, kind of like machines grinding.
And you have to have that animation in certain documentaries to tie things together narratively, because you weren't there to film it when it happened, right?
Right.
So that animation is really critically important for a documentary like this.
And then the other thing is we just want to get more people seeing it, and so I guess I'm being long-winded, but it's just like, go look at the GaryCon draft, share it with your friends. Like when you go to game night, show it to your friends. It's like, have fun with it, watch it,
Right.
or you can even hate it. Like maybe you enjoy hating it. I don't know.
Right. Well, they do say that it used to be said, I guess when Howard Stern was on regular radio, I don't know if he's on now that he's on Sirius or whatever, but used to when he was on radio, terrestrial radio, the average Howard Stern fan listened an hour a day, and the average Howard Stern hater listened 3 hours a day. So,
Right.
Yeah. So please hate this documentary and watch it over and over.
But share the hate.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I sat through this entire disgusting, horrible thing twice.
Look what they did today.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So let's real quick talk about some of the different levels and what they're going to get. And then we got to wrap it there. But folks, again, we're talking, and I'll put some show notes out, but this is the Secrets of Blackmoor, the true history of Dungeons and Dragons Kickstarter. It's a documentary on Dave Arneson's involvement and his circle of friends in how role-playing even happened, and then D&D after that, because D&D wouldn't have happened without Dave Arneson and his group of gaming friends. So,
I'll start at the top of the list, then I'll just go back through it. I mean, we tried to come up with cool things for people, and I'm going to just talk really fast. David Mcgarry likes the movie so much. David Mcgarry is one of our biggest fans.
And this is the guy that did the Dungeon board game.
Yeah, and he there goes my light. And he said, you know what, he's got a little tiny collection of still wrapped, pristine first edition dungeon board games, which you can tell that they're their original version because they misspell his name. It says David Mcgarry. It's like, you have to see it. But anyway, he's donating basically himself. And so it's sort of a very high level. It's $10,000. But he will come to your house anywhere in North America and walk up to your doorstep and ring your doorbell and come in, and he will bring Dave Arneson's ping pong table with him if we have anything to do with it. And he will sit down at Dave Arneson's ping pong table where Blackmoor was invented and play Dungeon on the same table where Dungeon was first played in Dave Arneson's basement. And he will give you, you won't have to unwrap your pristine game because he will bring used games to play on.
Nice.
And you can invite your friends over. So maybe that's one of those things where, a couple guys get together and decide to go in on it together or something. But you'll have bragging rights. David Mcgarry and the Secrets of Blackmoor film crew came to my house and sat in. Because we're going to be there too, directors.
Dungeon almost deserves its own biography. It's gone through a lot of revisions. But anyway, I know you're trying to go through your Kickstarter stuff, so yeah.
Digression, I would love to do more on Dungeon in the movie. There's so much to talk about. We can barely squeeze in the story of RPG in 2 hours. And we end up just ignoring things. A lot of people will be like, well, they didn't mention this, they didn't mention that. And it's like, well, we didn't really have the time. We hope to do another movie.
Yeah, I mean, do you have enough footage that you could cut like a whole nother special features disc or something? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the other thing is, going back through the list, we'll get to that. The next thing down is David Mcgarry really wanted to do something where people could come to the Twin Cities and see what it was like to be with his gaming group. Okay. And so he created this thing called the Minnesota Gaming Experience. And, for those who can afford to do it, who want to do it, it's sort of like a cruise ship ride. I call it the cruise ship of fantasy gaming, experiences. Because it's like you go to the Twin Cities and spend 6 days gaming with all the game designers that were there designing games. Like you play Fight in the Skies with Carr. You play Gy-gax with Carr, who was one of the co-authors of the ship. You play Strategos, and you play... I'm going to run Tonnisborg, actually, for it.
That's cool.
Yeah, and then you got Bob Meyer, who's the last Blackmoor Dungeon Master running Blackmoor. Kevin McCall is going to do Richard Snyder's Star Probe, a session of that. A lot of just really cool stuff. And we're going to start it out by showing you the movie. And it's like, here's the history. Now we're going to spend the rest of the week playing the games that are in the movie with the people that are in the movie. So it's kind of a cool thing. And then, and I might even bring I might do something and put together some sort of package of documents and artifacts and stuff to give out to people that come, sort of a sneak thing like that. But So those are the big ones. The next one down is the Tonnisborg Dungeon, which we talked about briefly, but I'll just do a little description. Basically, it's a very old dungeon from 1973. It predates the publication of Dungeons & Dragons, and it is a really significant historical find. We were awed when we found it. I've been running it for my game group. I think I might be the first person to run it in 30 years.
Oh, wow.
And the only other people who ran that dungeon were David Mcgarry and Greg Svensson, who was the great Svenny, basically the paladin of Blackmoor.
Okay.
And who drew it. And so we made a module out of that. It's going to be a really nice... There's a lot on the Kickstarter page. If you go to the update on that, you can see my ideas about wanting to make a really high-quality hardbound book that looks like something that you might like pull out of your grandfather's bookshelf and go, what is this? And suddenly you're like, I don't believe, this is amazing.
It is amazing.
Because I don't I think that all the stuff people are publishing now looks like crap. It's all shiny and full of like flashy art that looks like Harry Potter to me.
Yeah, I'm definitely a product of the old school. I like the more rough sort of, I don't know. If it requires me to invest more of my imagination into it, then I tend to connect with it more.
See, I want something that looks like you're opening like the Wizard's spell book. I don't want something that looks like opening like a Marvel comic book.
Right.
But anyway,
yeah,
people are going to diss on me for saying that about their favorite game art and stuff. But
everybody has their. I mean, it's subjective. It's a subjective thing.
So. My face. I'm old. Anyway, so we did that Tonnisborg, and then we got the usual stuff. We got some really cool looking dice bags. They're kind of fuzzy with the logo. And the logo is everything in the movie is kind of accidental. I called Bob Bledsaw and I was like, Bob, we need a t-shirt design, and I'm like, how much can I pay you for this? And he's like, Griff, don't worry about it. I'll just draw something up, and this is Bob Bledsaw, Judges Guild.
Right.
Old school style.
Which is amazing in its own right. Yeah.
Judges Guild, I'm not worthy. You guys are great. And so Bob sends me this envelope, and I get this like cool drawing of Blackmoor Castle with Gertie the Dragon flying over it, and it's silhouetted by a circle moon.
Nice.
So theme. And so that's kind of a funny story because Bob was like, Griff, don't worry about it. I'll just give you a drawing.
That's cool.
And back to the Tonnisborg. Historically, Dave Arneson published, after his falling out with Gary Gygax, he published a lot of his notes in a book called First Fantasy Campaign.
Yeah.
It's sort of, a lot of people didn't understand that it's really just his game notes for his campaign, and so it's really it's disjointed because only he really understood his notes. But so it's not exactly like a complete module, but then it is, But anyway, Bob Bledsaw was like 14 years old, and he was doing the artwork that appears in the First Fantasy Campaign in 1977.
Nice.
Okay. So while I'm a nerdy
kid,
I
remember him mentioning that during the rough cut that he was talking about. He was like 13 or 14 doing artwork for one of the modules. Yeah.
So anyway, Bob, and in fact, Bob is cool because one of his mentors is Frazetta, and he used to talk with Frazetta and stuff.
Oh, wow.
Frazetta sort of like he'd call him if he had a problem with a drawing, he'd call Frazetta. Like, how many people can do that, right?
That is cool.
My dad said, I'll call him up. I'm having trouble drawing hands, and turn it upside down, or whatever.
Just make it look like a death dealer, and you'll be fine. No, I'm joking. Frazetta had much wider range than that. His daughters are like they have the quote unquote Frazetta girls, and they're running the, they distribute his stuff, and they came to a con here not that long ago, and they call themselves literally the Frazetta girls are his daughters, and
I've seen their stuff around. But anyway, let me just run through this really fast. So anyway, Bob contributed that logo for our t-shirt, so we put it on our dice bag, and the dice bags are really nice, and it's funny because they're not selling very well, but they're like double layered fuzzy things with like a little lock thing on them, and I mean, when I was a kid, we just used like crappy, I don't know, whatever you can find.
Crown Royal bag, whatever. Yeah, I actually one time used for a dice bag. I got a fancy pair of boxers, and it came in a little. They came in a little fabric bag, and that was my dice bag for a long time. So.
Yeah, I had this little thing that was about this big that I found that was like, I don't know what it was, but it had a little drawstring, and it would hold like maybe 10 dice, which in the day, dice were expensive.
Was fine. Yeah, that was fine. Yeah, back then.
It's like all of this stuff about having a lot of stuff, and it's like, how many dice do you use at once? 5, Anyway,
Right.
So anyway, we got the dice bags. We were doing, it's kind of the standard stuff. We feel like the dice bags was kind of like a really special treat because it's beyond just doing a T-shirt,
Right.
T-shirts, and then below the T-shirt level is the DVD level. And then we have a DVD level, which we're also going to do an add-on where you can upgrade to a Blu-ray if you want. The big thing.
Oh, nice. That's nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
The DVD is going to be another one of those featured special things because we've got so much footage, we couldn't use it all in the movie.
Oh,
and
really?
so, yeah. So this will be the unique Kickstarter bonus DVD where you get 2 discs. One of them will be a lot of just extra footage, people talking about gaming and stuff. But it'll be like an hour at least of stuff on the bonus disc. And that's only going to be available through the Kickstarter. We're going to keep selling the movie, obviously, after it's done.
Right.
But we're not going to do the double disc set as part of the selling
Okay,
it
so
later.
if you want the double disc, you got to get in now, baby.
Yeah, and that'll probably tease. It won't be like teasing, but it's like we'll give you some good stuff that we would like to have used in this movie, but we were saving for the next movie.
And
So you'll
I
watch that and
personally,
go like, wait a minute.
I love that kind of stuff personally. You're like, whoa, that's just all the little tidbits. But anyway,
We have this one interview clip where Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax are sitting there together, and they both admit that they stole it all from Phil Barker. But that's only on the bonus DVD.
okay. Well, that's worth it right there. So
Yeah.
I guess the statute of limitations is over now. So, those guys.
I'm trying to think of anything else.
Well, I did. You do on Christmas Day, it's a draft, but like a full draft version you're dropping on Christmas Day digitally, right?
We're doing 2. Okay, if you
Okay.
come in at a certain level, and
Okay.
I forgot what the level is. I think it's the $100. It's the Brownstein level, which is kind of like to celebrate, Wesley's Brownstein. You
Let
get
me
the
see where
whole,
I'm at.
which is going to be a little rough because I don't have all the animations all over it and stuff. It'll really be more like interviews and voices, because I'm waiting to hire the editors to do the animations. But
I'm at the first dwarf level. That's where I'm at. So I get
really,
I
you're
get-
Ross Mason.
Yeah, let's see. I get special thank you in the movie credits, handmade Secrets of Blackmoor velvet dice bag, which you were talking about. I get a T-shirt, Secrets of Blackmoor movie T-shirt, limited edition DVD of the completed movie, and then a streaming VOD of the completed movie. And then on Christmas Day, I get the 24-minute Brownstein movie segment rough draft.
Right. So what we're
Right.
doing is we're splitting it. If you're at a lower level, which I think starts pretty early, you get the 24-minute, just the Brownstein section where it really talks about Brownstein. We've also been invited to GaryCon this year to show the Brownstein segment.
Yay!
Because big display about David Wesley, and
Right.
so we're going to be part of that with a TV screen, so people can watch the history there and see like that.
Is he like a guest of honor or something this year at GaryCon, David Wesley, or you don't know?
He's the rock star,
Okay. All right. Yeah, I need to talk to him one of these days. I think he'd be fun to talk to. Anyway, I got to wrap. Griff, man, I really appreciate your time.
Had a blast. I wish I could go longer.
What's that?
No. I'm kidding.
Okay. Oh, you could go longer. I could too, but I'm
in a time zones. It's just dying, and I'll still have an hour of energy in me.
I'm actually like a night owl, but I need to at least go kiss my wife goodnight. So she just texted me and said, "Good night, love you," and I'm like, "Ooh, I probably better at least go down there and tell her good night." So
yeah.
But anyway,
Thanks
man,
thanks for people to notice us for the first person, like noticing us out of the media, sort of.
I'm glad to help, and also it's been an enjoyable conversation. So, and after you get the movie out, like in the DVD version or whatever and all that, then we'll schedule a radio show to talk about it. So that way you get the best of both worlds.
I just got a text from my players in Empire. I have to go play Empire.
Okay.
So.
All right. Well, to blame it on Shane Plays Geek Talk. So, folks, again, you've got till December 25th. What time does it end on December 25th? What time?
It ends on I think it's 24th at midnight.
At midnight, yes.
Christmas Eve.
I've got this. I'm showing December 25th at 12:59 a.m. CST. So yeah, in Mountain Time, that would be midnight, whatever. So anyway, and you're doing that specifically because that's Blackmoor's 50th anniversary, right?
Brownstein. David West.
Yeah, Brownstein's. That's okay. That's why I wanted to
50 years
clarify
of
that.
Brownstein.
50
The first role
years,
playing game.
50 years of Brownstein. Okay, cool, folks. But we'll talk about Brownstein another time. Right now, we're talking about the Kickstarter. You got till basically Christmas Eve or Christmas Day or whatever. Go to the Kickstarter. Look at Secrets of Blackmoor, the true history of Dungeons and Dragons, being done by my guest Griff and his partner Chris. And it's good stuff, and it's worth the price of admission to get in at the minimum $5. Just pledge $5 and get into the updates if you're into this kind of thing, because the Kickstarter updates have a lot of good stuff in them. Like I said, it's almost like a little hidden blog. So, all right, well, Griff, man, be good. Go kick some butt at Empire, and we will catch you next time, folks. Thanks for listening.
All right.
Shane Plays Geek Talk. All right.